Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Now we are continuing our look into the history of G.I. Joe with the 40th anniversary just in the rear window. We've spoken to Larry Hama on the comic side. We've spoken to Kurt Bazigian and Ron Rude out on the toy side. And today we're going to be talking to another very special guest who was there at the genesis of the comics. And I won't be doing it alone. I will be joined by Tim, my co-host, Tim Finn. So let's introduce him now.
I really want to talk Joe with you. It's a real American Tim. American Tim.
Hi, Mark. And hello,
Hi,
listeners.
Tim.
Mark, you just said that the anniversary is in the rearview mirror, but if G.I. Joe launches in March of 82 and an anniversary is 1 year, that's 12 months. So at time of recording, we've got a month and a half left of this anniversary. Let's introduce our guest.
So today we will be talking to Jim Shooter. He's an American comics creator, editor, and publisher. He made his start writing Legion of Superheroes when he was only 14 years old. He served as the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics from 1978 to 1987. And during that time, he launched G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero in 1982. He gave Larry Hama the writing gig, and he was had the credits in the books as editor-in-chief up to issue 64. Now, he's had a long and illustrious career. After leaving Marvel, he founded several comic companies, including Valiant Comics, Defiant Comics, and Broadway Comics, launching many of the comics and characters that everyone knows and loves. But without further ado, let's add him in. Here's Jim. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Good to have you join us.
My pleasure.
I'm going to jump in with a question that set in the late 70s and early 80s that tees up G.I. Joe. Can you describe the world and the feeling of licensed comics at Marvel as G.I. Joe arrives? Because you have Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, ROM, Godzilla has just ended. What is the world? What is the outlook at Marvel?
Well, I mean, Marvel would have been dead without Star Wars. That Roy Thomas, I guess he was out in California at that point. Somehow he was privy to some of what was going on with Star Wars, and he desperately wanted us to license it. I didn't have any authority then. I was just the editor. I wasn't the editor in chief yet. It was 1977, and nobody wanted it. I didn't have a vote. Nobody asked me, but nobody wanted it, and they didn't even really know what it was. But Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, they were saying, "Oh, science fiction doesn't sell," and my answer to that was, "Show me a good one." And because I mean, what do you mean? So anyway, there was some debate, and I all I wanted to do was have a look at it, but Roy was the only one who really seen much of it. And but he still had a lot of clout. He was just a contract writer at that time, writer editor. But he held his breath till he turned blue, and man, we ended up doing it, and it saved the company. It sold so much that everything else was losing money. I mean, without Star Wars, we were losing more than $1 million a year. With Star Wars, it kept us alive all by itself, and it gave me a year to turn it around. And I got great people, and we did. So to me, Star Wars is the most important thing that ever happened to Marvel. As far as the other things, the people upstairs of me, this is when I was editor-in-chief and vice president. So there was all these other vice presidents, and there were 6 of them, and the president of the company. none of them had ever opened a comic book and really didn't know what made comic books go. So if something would work, like Star Wars, then they want to do every movie. Let's just do movies, If something would work like a toy, like G.I. Joe, then all they want to do is toys. The next thing you know, I'm doing Chris Star and Starriers. And see, I had a lot of power, and you should see all the list of stuff I successfully fended off. And I reported to the president. Nobody could overrule me but him. But other people had his ear too. And if they convinced him that we should do Starriers, we're doing Starriers, So that was the climate. Was we had done a couple things that were tremendously successful. I kind of got roped into doing something that I really didn't want. We did the best we could, and some of them came out really well. Matter of fact, one that I licensed all on my own was Micronauts, and that far outlasted the toy, and also ROM. It was some of the best stuff Bill Mantlo ever did. We had some good art on it. It was fun, and the toy was gone in an instant. But the book went on for, I don't know, years, I guess. And anyway, so that was the climate. It was like it was. We had some things that were really successful. We did the best we could at everything. We had some things we'd rather not, but we did the best anyway. And they, of course, I kept telling him, it can't just be a toy. It has to be a super toy. It can't just be a movie. It has to be a giant mega hit, But anyway.
And what was the sort of the creator perception of some of these licensed properties? I've heard sort of Larry Hama describe them as being, I guess, they're being a little bit of a taint to working on the licensed books.
A few guys. I mean, Doug Minch did some good stuff on. There were a lot of good guys that were fine with that. Herb Trimpe, I mean, but there were a few people like Denny O'Neil. Denny, Hall of Fame, but for some reason he thought it was more dignified to write Batman or Daredevil than it was to write, Transformers. I don't know why that is, but whatever. Some guys didn't like it, and also for G.I. Joe, I mean, Larry often talked about how it was difficult to get people to work on it. Why? Because anybody at Marvel could sit down and write a Daredevil story. Everybody knew Daredevil, right? But with G.I. Joe, you had to do some research because Larry wasn't going to let you get away with using phony weapons or not getting the lingo right. So it was a little harder work, but there were a lot of good guys and they enjoyed it. And same with Anami. I think you had Doug Murray, maybe, but it's guys that they really liked that. Mike Zeck loved to do that stuff. A lot of great guys were into it. And so it was, like I said, we didn't struggle that hard. I mean, there's a few people who didn't want to, but the rest of us did.
Was some of this financial, if a book was licensed, or maybe I'm thinking too much sort of in the last 5 or 10 years, if a book was licensed, was its budget at Marvel lower because Marvel had paid some of its budget to be able to make the book in the first place? Would a writer and artist make less money?
No. I wrote the budget for my area. I was in charge of all the publishing stuff. There was a circulation department and the subscription lady, and there was things that I didn't directly control, but all of the creative and editorial and almost every publishing decision, that was me. And the fact is, I wrote the budget every year. Okay. And no individual comic book had a budget. I calculated how many pages we were going to do that year, and I decided how much money that would cost. I never had a budget rejected or even discussed, except one, which was my first one, because the guy before me, instead of like actually doing the research and writing a good budget, they would just take last year's budget and add 10%. And so when I analyzed it and I found out what our average page cost was, which is much more than the previous budget said it was, I wrote it correctly. And the president asked me, "So what? This is insane. You're like just a giant increase." I said, "No, it isn't. That's what we really pay." I said, "The people before weren't doing a job." So he saw that, and then he actually said, he said, "All right, well, fix it." so I did. And so no individual book had a budget. We didn't, I could do anything I wanted. Besides, when I came in there, everything was losing money, and except Star Wars. And then when I got all these great people, I got Archie Goodwin, it's best of all time. I got Larry Hama, that's like winning the lottery. I got Louise Simonson, that's better than Christmas. I mean, I had all these great people: Bob Budiansky, Jim Salicrup, Carl Potts, eventually, Hal Milgram, all these wonderful, talented people. And they were, people who didn't know me maybe, or were afraid of me for some reason. Anybody come and work for Archie, anybody come and work for Louise. They say, "Well, Louise is there. How bad could it be?" And so those editors helped attract talent. I got on the task of making it better for cartoonists, because I thought we've been publishing some pretty sad stuff, and we need better people. We need people who care about it. No hacks. And I got my deal with the president of the company was that if I save money or if I beat my projections, I can use that money and plow it back in. He didn't think either of those things were possible. So he said, "I don't care what you do." Well, "I don't care what you do" is a pretty free hand. So I managed to save money by getting the company on time. That saved hundreds of $1,000s a year. I found all kinds of other ways to save money, and I beat my projections every year, every time. And so all of a sudden there's money. And I started, I doubled the rates. I doubled them again. We started introducing all these programs, benefits, healthcare. I paid all expenses. I said, if you're sending something to Marvel, we'll pay the shipping. If you're calling Marvel, in those days you paid per call, I said, I'll pay the phone bill. If I ask you to come to Marvel, I'll pay your train fare. If you're coming from far away, we'll pay all your travel expenses, and we'll feed you while you're here and put you in a nice hotel. And so things got better, and we got better guys, and people were making money, and it was really going good. So there was no budgetary concern about individual comics. That's why, like a comic that didn't sell as well as X-Men, like Dazzler, like I had Sienkiewicz covers on it. That cost a bunch of money, but he loved it. The covers looked great. It was outselling Superman by 80,000 copies, so it wasn't doing that bad. I had total free hand.
And you sort of led the way with royalties, I believe. At
Marvel. Yeah. On the day I took the job, the president agreed that we could start paying royalties. Once again, I don't think he thought that was going to happen, because not everything was kind of he told me when he hired me, he said, you're here to preside over the death of Marvel Comics. He says, I'm getting us out of this loser business. He said, I'm going to get us into animation and children's books. Try not to lose too much money while I get that done. And I said, you're wrong. I said that can be big, and we're going to make it big. It's going to take a while, but we can start. And he said, "Oh, baloney." Didn't say it that politely, but I said no. I said that this we can turn this around, and we're going to. And so when we did turn it around, then the sky was the limit. I could was making so much profit for Marvel, which is good for everybody. The fans were liking the books; they're enjoying it. The artists were happier; they're getting paid better. They got benefits and rights. From when I started a plan for anytime you create a character, you own 20% of its adjusted gross forever. And so that came in handy for, like, say, Bill Mantlo, Rocket Raccoon. Anyway, I made things better, and it was no decisions about, how much did this issue cost? And I didn't care.
Is it perhaps the opposite to my previous question? rather than I mean, I think nowadays licensed books do have a lower budget within a publisher's line because they've paid the license.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
a
it
lot of publishers making stupid mistakes all over the place because that's just dumb. And
is
I'm
it is
sorry.
it the opposite though, where at Marvel a licensed book like Transformers or GI Joe, because it was tied to something that had this bigger life outside of comics, it was going to sell better and would pay better royalties to the creatives.
Well, the royalties were what they were. I mean, however well your book sold, you got royalties. When the royalty plan started, DC did theirs. They announced theirs about the same time, and we had the same threshold: 100,000 copies. After 100,000 copies, you get a percentage of the cover price for everyone after that. We had a sliding scale. Our sliding scale went up all the way to 10%. DC was 4% for that, but that's all. And the thing is, like, we're happy to pay those royalties because if you're the X-Men selling 1 million copies, you're just happy to give those checks to Chris because he deserved them, he earned them, and I think that you got to put all that stuff aside and worry about making it good, care about it, make it mean something, and make people thrilled to put that when they put that book down after reading it, that they think that's the best 65 cents they ever spent, right? And to me, I always tell the guys, I said, the best next issue ad is to make this one great. And so I had the best people. I was talking to the choir here, it was sometimes I had to educate the new guys a little bit, but some of them turned out to be really terrific, by the way. Ann Nesenti, genius, but we had, I think I had the priorities in the right order. I think that, you look at Disney when Walt was running it, it was wonderfully creative. And now to me, all the Pixar movies seem to be the same, and it's a marketing company now. And, I think some people, to make more money, will try to bring the cost down. One of the guys that ran the place before me, he was doing stuff like, rather than give Kirby a raise, he said, why don't you do every issue, just draw one that's a big head. It'll go faster. And it'll be like you're making more money. That's a plan. One was he had artists turn the board sideways and draw a panoramic scene in each book. And he paid them for one page, but he printed it as two. And, I said, you're just driving people away. This is just dumb. So we tried. They'd always ask people to do things for free. We need a little symbol for the corner. Can you knock one out, John Buscema? And your reward for that was getting your next job, I guess. I came in, I said, no, nobody works for free on anything. If you're working, we pay. And we did. And I tried to make it fair. I tried to, why? Because I was on the other side of that desk so long, I knew what the problems were. And I was trying to make it right, and made my, share of mistakes, a lot of them, but they're never in self-interest, always try to be fair, try and make it better for everybody. And I'd say for the most part, I succeeded. I think, I made a couple of bad calls in there, but that was, I wish I was smarter. What can I say?
So bringing it back to sort of GI Joe, what was your first kind of whiffs of GI Joe in the air?
Well, what happened was the president of Marvel Comics, his name was Jim Galton. He was at some charity function, and Erwin Hassenfeld was also there, and they met each other actually in the men's room. Washing their hands or something, I don't know, but they started talking, and Hassenfeld they were telling each other about what they did. And Hassenfeld was telling him all about the Hasbro, the Toy Biz, and Galton didn't really know a lot about comics, but he knew we made stories, right? So So Hassenfeld said that they were trying to revive some of the old brands, and one of them was GI Joe, but they didn't know what they were going to do yet. And Galton said, well, and this is him quoting himself to me. He said, "You should let us do that. We've got nothing but geniuses." All right. And so a meeting was arranged at their lawyer's office downtown, way downtown in Manhattan, someplace. And the president, Galton, and I went to this meeting. There were several Hasbro executives, not Hassenfeld himself, but there's several Hasbro executives. And they had a one-slide slideshow. It was a picture of a soldier, a photo, and the logo, G.I. Joe, a real American hero. And that's all they had. I said, well, the logo is nice. Anyway, so we're talking about it, and they didn't even know what size figures they were going to make. They thought, well, the big dolls are not a good idea anymore, we think, but we don't know what to do. I said, you got to make them a Star Wars size. I said, because that's what, 3 3/4, I think, yeah. And they said, well, why do you think that? And I said, well, it's the most popular one. Number two, I was a little boy once, and if your figures are the same size as the Star Wars figures, little boys will have them fighting, because that's what boys do. And they said, okay, all right, we're talked into it, 3 3/4, and we're going to articulate them, and everything's fine. And then one guy says, well, we want to have a whole line of toys. He said, what are we going to do? Have G.I. Joe, G.I. Fred, G.I. Steve? He actually said that. And I said, no, this is me. I said, G.I. Joe will be the name of the unit. And you can't do war, so it has to be anti-terrorist. You can do anti-terrorism. I said, it's a top secret unit. Okay. And it's all the best soldiers and the best sailors and the best airmen and the best Marines, and super secret. But when there's a terrorist crisis, you call in G.I. Joe, right? They like that, and they like the little slogan. And we talked about some other stuff too, but they said, well, look, we want to do animation and comics, Marvel, and of course we'll do the toys and everything. And actually, the first year, Marvel represented them at licensing, and our licensing people were sufficiently inept that they couldn't license anything. So they took that away from us the second year. But their question was, well, can you get us a story, an outline, soon? I said, you'll have it in a couple of days. I went back to the office, and I walked straight to Larry Hama's office, and I said, this is what I've got going. What do you think? And he had been working on an anti-terrorist unit, which was called Fury Force. It was going to be like a revival of the Howling Commandos. It was going to be like either their children who had gotten together and had formed this anti-terrorist unit under the army. It was all army, and but it was going to be anti-terrorist. I knew about that. I mean, and so he said, can I use some of the ideas I've been working on from that for this? I said, if you want to, sure. Yeah, go ahead. So he basically took some of the pieces from the Fury Force, which he was still just developing. Like he wanted them to have their secret headquarters was like under the chapel, I think, or under the chaplain's house or something. And a few other things, like just transferred them over to G.I. Joe. And after that, it's all Larry. I mean, the only other contributions, I made a couple of suggestions once in a while, but Archie Goodwin created the Cobra Command and the Cobra Commandos. You want to hear how that happened?
Let's go for it. Yeah.
All right. So Larry wrote a story, an outline of what it would be, and it's like a first issue, and I rewrote it. Not to change anything, but Larry wrote it like a Marvel plot, and I said, "This is marketing. This is a pitch piece." So I sort of dramatized it a little bit, and it didn't change anything that was in it. I just threw in some football cliches, and he would not be denied, stuff like that. And toy guys love it.
Is this with Hasbro as the audience in mind?
Yes, because that story was probably going to decide it either way. whether they were going to go with us or not. And so Larry's story was brilliant, and I just kind of made it a little more dramatic. I just told it more dramatically for Hasbro, and that was fine, and they got that, they loved it, and so we started on it, and so Larry was creating characters, and he was on the phone with them all the time, and we had several meetings where they would tell us about technology that they had, and Larry would come up with some way to use it. And so, all right, finally comes they get their prototypes done, and we went up to Pawtucket, flew up, Mike Hobson, me, Larry, and Archie. I think that's all. Anyway, we flew up to Pawtucket, and we're sitting in this big conference room, and they bring in the prototypes, and they show us everything that are going to be in the launch. And of course, the early launch, the spring launch, is your lower price items, is the figures and small things. There's sort of a second launch in usually August, where they introduce the play sets and the more expensive items for Christmas. So we're looking at all these prototypes. They look great, and Archie, who he wasn't really involved in G.I. Joe. I just brought him along because he was smart. So he's looking at all this stuff, and he says, "You don't have any villains." And they said, No, villains don't sell. We're not doing any villains. And he says, "Who are they gonna fight?" And then Larry and I are looking at each other. He's right. And so the three of us are arguing with them about having a villain. And they said, all right, we'll have one bad guy figure. What do you got? And Archie pipes up and he says, we're going to call this evil organization called Cobra. And there'll be the Cobra Commander and the Cobra Commandos. And I think he just did that off the top of his head. And they said, well, can you give us some drawings, some visual? And Larry says, you'll have it tomorrow. And so we did. And they did. I think that first part of the launch, the initial launch, they had one Cobra Commando. And guess what? It was one of their better selling figures because if a kid buys 5 GI Joes, he wants 5 bad guys. So he buys that toy 5 times. And that's the rich kids, I guess. But at any rate, it worked really well. In fact, it worked so well that each new year of G.I. Joe, it became about what new villains we can introduce. The Dreadnoks and whatever. So and then Larry was really good at creating. Even if they had a suggestion, he'd make it work. And a lot of stuff he suggested, a lot of characters, he came out of his head. Larry and I did this together, I guess. One of our contributions was, of course, in the comic book, Larry introduced all kinds of strong female characters, really good ones, but they weren't making any female figures. And so I brought it up. Why don't you have, female figures? And we're arguing in favor of that. And they're saying, female figures don't sell. That's what you said about villains. I said, do vehicles sell? And he said, well, yeah, of course. I said, make the drivers women. And he's oh, well, yeah, maybe. And somehow then we eventually, I don't know, right away or later, but I guess Larry talked them into, was it Scarlet was the first one? Or I remember there was the Baroness, there was Scarlet.
And there was a female driver called Cover Girl.
Yeah, and then there was Lady something or other.
Lady J.
Yes, Lady J. Sorry, this is why you have to ask Larry, because he remembers everything. I remember the beginning part where I was involved. But we worked closely with Hasbro, and I'll tell you, they were so happy to work with Larry, and it's a good thing he was having fun where he was, or I think they would have hired him away.
Jim, issue 1 of G.I. Joe is I forget if it's double sized or triple sized. I have it in a book right there, but double size. Okay, so and it's $1.50 when issue 2 is a month later is 60 cents, and issue 1 of G.I. Joe is also on Baxter paper. And can you talk about the creative decision and the business decision of launching with such an expensive object?
Well, it didn't seem expensive to Hasbro, and they wanted us to do kind of a deluxe thing, so we did, and that's why it cost more. So that was the cover price. G.I. Joe #1 was the first comic book ever offered to the direct market returnable. It was, we knew it was going to be good, and we wanted that first issue. I thought was pretty impressive. And so we used to, the direct market was fairly new, and Marvel would fly all of the distributors, there were 18 of them at the time, into some location, some nice place, like this particular one I'm talking about, I think was in Florida, around Orlando somewhere, I believe. And so we would go there and talk to all the distributors at once. And, how can we help you? How to make it better? What can we do? And we'd also we'd take the opportunity to tell them what we had coming out, try to pitch it to them. So at that time we were about to launch G.I. Joe, and so I was talking about G.I. Joe, and I was booed off the stage. I was like, wait a minute, what's wrong? We don't want it. War doesn't sell. We're not interested. It's not war. It's terror. Same thing, And they just were hating on it, right? And I'm like, whoa, and so I talked to the other executive there, Mike Hobson. We both reported to the president, and I said, well, what do you think we should do here? So I said, offer it returnable, and he said, that's a good idea. Let's tell him. And then he got up and said, look, you guys need this book. There's not going to be anyone in America who doesn't know G.I. Joe. You need this book. He said, tell you what, we'll make it returnable. Take some, doesn't go, send it back, get your money back. And so on a Marvel #1 in those days, any Marvel #1, you could expect to sell 400, 500,000 copies of a #1. The direct market ordered 100,000 returnable. And I'm telling you, the day that book hit the shops, our phones were ringing off the hook. They wanted more and more and more. And of course, at that point, the #2 and I think 3 had already been ordered. So I had to do all kinds of bookkeeping to adjust the orders and everything. But it was a big hit right from the get-go, and it was really good. Why didn't they want G.I. Joe? Because it was war? Yes. Also, our sales manager at the time, a guy named Mike Friedrich, nice guy. He's just a sort of I don't know. He's a pacifist. He's anti-military. He's an extreme pacifist, and he was actually talking people out of it. That's our sales guy. Our marketing sales guy is going to all the retailers and distributors and telling them, don't buy this. If you say Mike Friedrich in Larry's presence, he will growl. But fortunately, we solved the problem, and because of that, Marvel and Friedrich parted peacefully. But and he did a lot of good things while he was there. That was that one thing. It just hit him the wrong way, and he wouldn't promote it. So anyway, that's how that all happened. It was just we wanted to do a deluxe package. Well, Hasbro wanted us to do a deluxe package. We did. That paper is expensive. I don't know. I don't remember how we decided on that price. It was me and the financial guy and the circulation director, but it didn't seem outrageous. I mean, we had other, good quality books that were also more expensive than the 65 centers.
If you have at the ready sales for the direct market of issue 1. Do you know what they were for the newsstand market, or as a ratio what they might have been?
Well, newsstand, of course, it's sold through, and you send 10,000 comics to a local independent distributor wholesaler. He let's say he sells 7,000, right? it was affidavit returns. In other words, they didn't have to send any physical evidence back. And so they lie. And they'd say they sold 4,000, 40%, or 5,000, 50%. So G.I. Joe was on the very high end of our typical scale. And I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was the best selling newsstand book that month. And something like the X-Men was, it was selling several 100,000, 300, 400,000 on the newsstand. So that's a high number. G.I. Joe was also our number one subscription book. The more subscriptions than anything. It was any other title. It dwarfed the rest of the line. Because people who loved it really loved it, and also Larry did a great job on it. He was the guy who made it go, and he did a lot of it himself. And I guess I technically edited it, but you don't have to tell Larry anything. He knows what he's doing.
And this period was still quite early in the infancy of the direct market, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I don't know when we're getting to 82 what sort of percentage it was, but was it like typically 10%, 20%?
Let's see, in 82. Well, I mean, it really started when I came in January 78, and I was looking at the print. Now I was privy to the print orders, and I'm looking at the print orders, and there's newsstand copies, there's military, there's Whitman copies, there's subscription, maybe something else, and then at the bottom was this number. It was said Seagate, and it was numbers went like 50, 75, 100. And so what is Seagate? So I went to the circulation guy and I said, "What's Seagate?" And he closed the door. And he said, "Look, I made a little deal with this guy Phil Silling, a friend, and I'm giving a real deep discount. It's just to get a little more volume, and it's cost plus. It's don't tell anybody." That's it. Who am I going to tell? So anyway,
because it's not returnable. The direct market is not returnable.
Well, that is not returnable, and it was also he's selling comics out the back door to his buddy. So, but at non-returnable. And so anyway, this guy Chuck Rosansky was a retailer in Denver. He came to see me. And he said, "Well, I was happy to see him." He said, "Well, your second choice." He said, "I really wanted to see the president of the company. He won't talk to me, but the notion that Jim Galton would ever talk to some retailer or something, wasn't going to happen. He couldn't care less. That's my problem." So anyway, Chuck told me, he said, "Look, we all love Phil. Phil Silling's a great guy. But he's kind of a bottleneck, and it's also not legal. You can't just sell to one guy." I said, "I get you in to see Galton." So I called upstairs and said, "You got to talk to this guy." And so we came up there. We had a meeting, and Chuck had an 11-point plan for what we should do. By the end of that meeting, we had enacted 10 of his 11 points. And so that was publishing trade terms, opening up to anybody who could meet the minimums, bringing it out of the closet. Guess what? Phil did better because all of a sudden the market is huge, and he was the first. And so he had a lot of traction, and he actually did better than he had been doing before. So it wasn't a bad thing to do to Phil, and much better. And so the terms, however, that he and the crony terms that Ed and Phil had cooked up remained. And even though it was cost plus, it was when the volume started to get bigger, that turned out to be a lot of money. And because your unit cost goes down as the print run goes up, and it's you get more per book. So and it started growing real fast. I mean, from those first early numbers where I saw it was 50, 100, X-Men is 300. The ones we knew were the best were the ones that sold the best. Fans had good taste, and so it's a good barometer. When tell if you're doing something right or not. Anyway, by a year or two into it, the numbers were in the many thousands. So as a percentage, I'm not exactly sure. I would say, and by 82, might have been 25%, something like that, 30 max, I'd say. And very quickly it became the dog instead of the tail.
And with the launch of issue 1 and the subsequent issues, I think they went back to multiple printings.
Yes.
And issue 2, I think particularly was really difficult to find because people,
It
ordered
was
higher
so
on one.
under ordered. You can't believe. I mean, if they took only 100,000 copies of one and it was returnable, imagine what they ordered on 2.
And
So
was it
yeah, good.
was it unusual to go back for multiple printings at that time in the way that happened with G.I. Joe?
It almost never happened with a regular comic book, and usually by the time it was that we knew we probably could have sold more, it was kind of too late. The only other book that stands out in my mind that we went back and did multiple printings of was the biography of Pope John Paul II, and we printed zillions of this. I think that's the greatest selling comic book of all time, worldwide.
And actually, it sort of there was also you went back to the well because at that time sort of trade paperbacks and things weren't the norm in the way they are today. But it was collected a couple of times, wasn't it, in different editions?
Yeah, I mean, it was
the digests and
that same thing happened with Star Wars when it was such a big hit. It ended up being reprinted in every format known to man, small, big, regular size. It was such a hit, and every time we do it, we'd sell out, and they'd want more. And it was so G.I. Joe was like that, not as big as Star Wars, not as big as the Pope, but really good. So like I say, Larry Hama is like winning the lottery. He really, I like a guy who pours his heart into it. That's what I want. Guy just doesn't care, and he's just churning it out. I'd rather he leave, but Larry cared desperately. He wanted it to be just right, and he did the best he could.
And so Larry sort of said publicly that he really wanted to be writing at that time. So I guess he sort of really embraced the opportunity. He said would have written anything.
Yeah. I don't know why. I don't think it was any kind of prejudice involved or anything. But when Larry came to Marvel, he expected he could get some freelance writing, and for a while he wasn't getting anything. And so he asked me. He said, "Look, can I do some freelance for the Lampoon people, 20th century, 21st century, whatever it was?" And I said, "Sure." And then the word gets around that Larry's looking for writing. I don't know why people didn't know this, but and then he started getting more stuff, and then he had G.I. Joe, and he didn't need any more. That filled him up.
And he tells the story that nobody else wanted to write G.I. Joe, and he was the last one to be asked because his office was the furthest one down from the corridor. But
that's not true either way. I mean, the furthest one down was Mark Gruenwald. Larry was a couple doors up from there. No, I mean, that's where it's one of the places we differ. As I told you at the beginning, it's a difficult book to write. Okay, especially to write enough to please Larry. And at the time, my policy was you couldn't be the writer and the editor. You couldn't edit your own stuff. So I sort of oversaw it, and that didn't involve much time because there was never anything wrong. So Larry, when he was able to ask himself to write it, he wrote it. It wasn't anybody. He was having difficulty finding people because it was hard. But when we worked it out so he could write it. And did fine.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, but I think the credited editor for the book at the start was Denny O'Neil.
It was. Yeah.
Is that likely to be more of a traffic control of Just
Well, you know, as I may have mentioned at the beginning, Denny didn't like toys. And the reason I originally said, well, Larry will do all the creative and then Denny can be the editor is because Denny was in the Navy, you know, and Denny knew military things.
If I can chime in,
he really wasn't interested. So fairly soon after that, we changed it.
Tom DeFalco is the editor for the first couple of issues.
Yeah,
And
that's right. Tom was doing that for a while.
Denny O'Neil takes over with, I think, issue 7.
7.
Yeah,
that didn't work out.
There's I was going to ask this story because it's a little bit later on in the history, but there's the famous story of issue 21, the silent issue, and as Larry tells it, he can't quite remember exactly the details of how it all came about, but it was a deadline crunch. They had to produce the issue, and I think part of the story is that there may have been an issue produced, but it was lost somewhere in Denny O'Neil's office on stacks of board. Does that ring true to you?
Well, I don't know that in particular, but you know, Denny was getting older and he would occasionally make mistakes. Toward the end of the time he was there, one time the 2 artists came in having drawn the same story. He gave it to this guy, forgot, and then he gave it to some other guy. After he left Marvel and went to DC, the first script he gave to somebody, he gave twice. And so 2 guys did the job. So I mean, I would believe that. I just I don't remember that incident in particular. As far as the silent issue, Larry told me about it. Larry was good about keeping me posted. And you know, if anybody else had said that, unless it was Goodwin or maybe Louise, I would have thought, I don't know, you know. But you know, Larry, trusted him. No worries. You know, I was fine with it. He did a tremendous job, and I had him paid for the script. I had him paid for writing it, because at first he just vouchered. I guess, did he do the art? Well,
yeah.
he didn't. He didn't voucher. He didn't voucher the writing because there's no words in it. And so I said, no, you give me a voucher for the script. I said, it's harder to do it, you know, silent, you know. And I said, and you still have to do the story, you know. So we paid him for the plot and the story, the writing script. And so there's this little old lady upstairs, her name was Millie Sheriff. And her job was, when the books came out, she would compare the printed book to the vouchers, you know, to see that, all right, let's see. Yeah, there's 22 pages and there's a voucher for 22 pages of pencils. And then she comes to issue 21 and she's like, there's a voucher for script and there's no words. So she called me up. What's going on here? And I explained to her, Millie, it's actually more difficult to do it the way Larry did. I said, and there's a story there and he had to tell it with pantomime. And I said, that's difficult. And so, you know, I don't care if there's words, you know, we're paying him. So she, all right, okay. And she was the bookkeeper. I know it wasn't like she had authority over it. You know, I could do anything I wanted, but it was her job to check, you know. And the little coda to that story is that later, as a lark, John Byrne had 2 all-white characters fighting in a blizzard. And so he had just white panels with sound effects and dialogue, you know, but no art. I paid him for the art because I thought, you know, making what's happening in those things clear without any picture, just in the dialogue and so forth. I said, that's difficult. We're going to pay you for those pages, John. And we did. And, you know, that also got me a phone call from Millie. But she was really a sweet lady. But I mean, she was, you know, a bulldog when it came to doing her job and doing it right, you know. And so I said, it's okay, Millie. I approve this. It's fine.
There's a set of characters in the world of G.I. Joe, the October Guard. It's the Russian equivalent to G.I. Joe. It's this Russian top secret squad. Yeah. And they first appear in issue 6
Okay.
of the Marvel series.
Yep.
This is an issue drawn by Trimpe. There is online a photo scans from an ash can of that issue, seemingly when it was going to be issue 3. And in this earlier version, it's not the October Guard who made return appearances in the G.I. Joe comic, showed up in the cartoon, showed up as action figures later. It is a creator-owned team from Trimpe and Tom DeFalco called Pravda Patrol.
Oh,
Does any of this ring a bell?
Pravda Patrol rings
these-
a bell, yeah.
These characters showed up one time in '82 in an issue of Bizarre Adventures, one of the black and white magazines.
Yeah.
And what seems to have happened is everyone at Marvel, or some people at Marvel, thought it would be okay to put creator-owned characters that Trimpe and DeFalco owned in an issue of G.I. Joe, and that at a certain point Hasbro says no, and then it looks like this issue is delayed or rescheduled. The characters, their faces are redrawn, and their names and the word balloons are fixed, so that it's this other set of characters now that's technically appearing. So since I've just told this whole story, does this ring a bell? Is this a story you can tell?
Yeah, there's not much more to tell. I think that DeFalco probably there's a little self-dealing there, but no, Hasbro was not going to have anything in there that they didn't own, and so when this came out, when we saw what was happening, and then somehow we worked it out that they could be reconfigured into something else, and that issue was used. I didn't remember all those details until you told me, but yeah, that's about what happened. And it just when I saw it, I saw everything before it went out. Well, almost everything. Sometimes I was over in England training people, and then either Mark Gruenwald or DeFalco would sign the books out. But I don't know if I was there or not. I mean, if I was and I was aware of it, I wasn't aware that it was creator-owned. I either forgot or I don't know. But at any rate, it got sorted out, and everybody was satisfied at the end of it. We didn't do ash cans in those days. I never even heard the word ash can in reference to a comic book.
Apologies if I'm using that term casually. What I'm seeing online are photocopies, black and white photocopies of the artwork.
Yeah, that's likely, but no, it was a little mess there, but it wasn't major. No, nobody went to prison over it. It's fine.
So I'm going to ask a general question. You just mentioned traveling to England, and before we filmed our intro, you described how often you would go and what you might do. Can you tell us what kind of traveling you did for Marvel? How often, where you went, and what you did when you were there? Some of this is conventions. Some of this is like Hasbro. What's your year of travel look like at Marvel?
Well, the first year, since the company, other than Star Wars, was dying, and I was trying to change things and rebuild it and make things better, I was on the road to conventions almost every week. I was out there, it's new at Marvel, or it's all different. Wait till you see, blah, blah, trying to get people to look again, because a lot of them weren't looking anymore. And so I traveled an awful lot that first year. And we did start to really turn it around. And so, and I got to know the upstairs executives who I didn't really get to know when I was associate editor. And among them were the licensing people, the vice president of domestic and vice president of international. The international people, they take a small group of the vice president and some assistants, and often the president would go, and they go to these book fairs in Europe. We went to either Bologna Book Fair, which is a children's book fair, but they did comics, or the main one we went every year was Frankfurt Book Fair. And as I got to know these executives, and I was invited to a couple meetings, I was as new editor in chief. We had the Germans in town, German licensees in town visiting, and they all wanted to meet me, and so I went to lunch with them and the president of the company, the vice president of business affairs, and the VP of licensing. And the Europeans know their stuff. They would ask questions that no one at the table could answer except me. And so then I started getting more routinely invited to these meetings, and some of them took place in my office. And then that first year, they'd gotten the drift that I'm pretty good at selling Marvel. And so they asked me to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. So I did, and was very helpful selling things because I actually knew what they were. I mean, they'd ask, the foreign publisher would ask a question about the X-Men or Daredevil, and you'd see the licensing people looking down their list to see if it, what's that? So anyway, I did the color commentary, and they made the deals, and it worked really well. So that first year I was traveling every place, all over the place, all these small conventions, big conventions, whatever. San Diego, they didn't have a New York Comic Con then, but there was Phil Silling's July Con, July 4th. And so I was like as many places as I could go to, to preach my story there. After the second year, we were doing better. I didn't go to as many shows, but I started arranging for Marvel to send people places. Whichever year was the year of the death of Phoenix. Might have been 2 years and it might have been 3. But we had started helping guys get to conventions, so there was more than me out there. But usually in those days, the convention would pay. They'd fly you in, put you up in a hotel, give you a table. So the year that the death of Phoenix was happening, and the sales just exploded, took X-Men from sort of middle of the road to number one in the industry, where it stayed for 20 years. But anyway, so that year I got a call from what's his name, Shel Dorf out of San Diego, and like I said, remember the conventions are the ones paying for people, and he said, Jim, we'd like you to be our guest this year. We'll pay your airfare, we'll pay your hotel, And I said, Shel, I'll pay my own. I got an expense account. I said, I will come on my own dime happily. So use that money to get somebody else. And he says, have to be Marvel? I said, I don't care. Just do something good for the industry. And I said, and furthermore, I'll tell you what, if you promise to give them stage time, I will bring on my dime, all expenses, the entire X-Men team. And I almost did it. I mean, there was Chris, of course, he went. John Byrne went. Terry Austin went. Tom Orzechowski was there. I don't think Glynis, the colorist, I don't think she wanted to go for some reason. Oh, and the editor, Louise. So we took the whole X-Men team out there. Marvel paid for everything, and Shel did his. He lived up to what he said. They were on stage a lot, and boy, they were mobbed. I mean, there were people standing by the door to listen because you couldn't get in the room, and so that really was a good thing. The next year, all the companies are sending people to conventions. We were also the first to have a booth. Next year, well, everybody has a booth. But DC had their famous $1 million booth. Ours was little, but it functioned. And there was quite a time. And so I was doing some traveling the second year, and of course the book fairs, Bologna Book Fair, Frankfurt Book Fair. And I think it was probably, and I did go to the UK sometimes because we didn't really have a a production facility there, but we had people over there managing the business, and I went there sometimes. Then after we officially opened Marvel UK, and I don't know what year that was. It might have been 79. It could have been 80. I don't know. But it wasn't 78. I don't know. But right around there, near the beginning. Then I started going over there regularly too. And what would happen is if I'd go to Frankfurt or go to visit some licensee, Barcelona, Paris, whatever, on the way back, I would stop at the London office, spend at least a few days with them, and then come back. The managing director there was Robert Sutherland, and we spent a good bit of time together talking about, how to make it better, how to fix it, whatever. And good man, smart man.
It must have been around about the time that like the Alan Moore Captain Britain stuff was happening as well, I guess.
I guess so. And yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on that, but yeah. And then Claremont wrote some Captain Britain, and but at first we were publishing it, or we were doing the work in New York. We had a British department, and that was not too good. But the one we had Marvel UK, and it was run by Robert Sutherland, and he started getting some great people like Alison Gill and others. I think Barry Kitson started working for them at one point. Yeah, I mean that was much better. And some of their books, I guess they were reprint, or like Care Bears. Care Bears was the #1 comic book in the UK for a while. Better than the X-Men, better than, was it Rupert? Yeah, is that right?
Rupert the Bear.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing really good numbers with Care Bears there, and X-Men did well, and some other things. And then they were creating some of their own.
What was I gonna be that spot?
Care Bears. Oh, yeah, I know that.
There's another licensed property, isn't it? Care Bears.
Yeah.
So I was thinking back to the Marvel deal specifically with Hasbro, and I was reading your blog, and you described the that Marvel did character and story creation, is what you said, rather than just comics. So was there a direct sort of contractual link between Hasbro and Marvel to help with that character creation, rather than to Larry as a freelancer?
I guess I read the contract at some point, but I don't really remember. Our relationship with Hasbro, especially on G.I. Joe, very collegial, very, I mean, they loved him. They liked us. We worked very well with them. And, I think that they were happy to get Marvel, Larry, some credit. It was just a very easy relationship. They would come down for meetings, and they would show us technology that they had. This is my phony example, but they'd say, "Look, it jumps. What is it?" And Larry would say, "We're going to call it the jump tank. Jumps over obstacles." He'd always come up with something. That's phony. I made that up. But
there was a jumping thing called the pogo, so
it might be it. But he, Larry, they would show him something, and they would would roll, or would wiggle, and he always came up with some. It was naked technologies, no skin on it, and they say, "What can we do with this? We got this technology. What do you think?" And Larry would come up with something, and he was helping them. I mean, really, in very fundamental ways. He wasn't just writing the comics. He was really involved, and I stopped going to the meetings. It was just sitting there watching Larry do all the be a genius, and I said, "Yeah, I know already. I don't need to see this every day." So
they'd roll up to the Marvel offices, and you'd go into some meeting room, and they'd open a briefcase, and there'd be all of these bits of toys and
those big what do I call those ATA cases, or they had ways to transport their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we go to the conference room, and in one big conference room, and they just spread all this stuff out on the table. And usually, well, it was always Larry, often me, and then sometimes we'd involve a writer or artist. I think DeFalco, who was kind of my assistant, he would come sometimes. But yeah, it was kind of fun. But like I said, it's all Larry. It's like, and he didn't need me there to help. I think I told you all of my contributions.
Presumably, some of these meetings are you're looking at GI Joe and Transformers and Visionaries. Presumably, some of the meetings are doubled up for several Hasbro product lines.
No.
Oh.
No, it was slightly different with Transformers. The way Transformers happened was we'd been successful with G.I. Joe, and then this Hasbro executive, his name was Bob Prupus, came into my office, and I got to know him over time. We'd see him at Toy Fair and this and that. And he comes in with this bag, he takes out this car, puts it on my desk. I said, well, that's nice. He says, watch this. Click, 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 click. It's a robot. Click, 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 click. It's a car. I said, wow, why does it do that? And he said, that's what I'm here to find out. And so I tried to, whenever these toy development things would come up, I had written into the budget money for this. And I thought, we're paying well for this because this may make $1 billion for somebody. So we paid really well for people to do this. I did a number of them myself, but I didn't pay myself. I figured, look, I'm the editor-in-chief. This is my job, but like if I hired an editor to do it, and I did sometimes, they get well paid. And sometimes we brought in people like, I remember we brought in Walt and a bunch of other people one time on this one development thing, John Romita Jr. on one. Anyway, so I said they paid well. And when Transformers came around, it was kind of Denny O'Neil's turn. So I asked him if he wanted to do it. Well, he wanted the money. so he didn't really know what to do. And so I kind of fed him his lines. I said, well, how about this? And how about that? And so he wrote it, and he just didn't care about it. I mean, Denny was a fantastic writer, but his heart wasn't in it. He just, was hoping to get a paycheck. So I paid him, and then I kept what parts I had made up, and I wrote the treatment myself, like what Larry did, and I wrote that. I did the same job basically, and credit where credit is due. Denny created the name Optimus Prime. That's a Denny name. Oh, wow. And that's about it. Anyway. So I presented to Hasbro my treatment, Cybertron, the Wikis, and the war, all that stuff, and that's what it was. It was a foundation document, and they loved it, and so we started on it, and I same with G.I. Joe. I turned it over to Bob Budiansky, similar kind of guy. Bob can do anything. He writes, he draws. He was a great editor. He's organized. And he really did a great job with it, just like Larry did. And he created characters and so forth. Now, the relationship with Hasbro was different though, because Hasbro had this this advertising agency called Griffin Bacall. All right, and Griffin Bacall was a significant size advertising agency just because of the Hasbro account. It was like 60-something% of their revenues. And I guess Hassenfeld had been a college roommate or something. Anyways, he was dealing with them because he was friends with either Griffin or Bacall. I don't remember which one. And so they're seeing like Hasbro using us as a resource. And they kept trying to wedge themselves in between us. Well, wouldn't happen with Larry. They would not. They whatever they told Griffin Bacall, they just still called Larry all the time. Okay, with Transformers though, Griffin Bacall successfully wedged themselves in there, and they at first were going to do the development after Bob Prupus had got me involved, but then Griffin McCall was going to do it. So what happened was we were told to send everything to Griffin McCall, and they had started a little in-house production executive production group called Sunbow. And so, okay, I sent my treatment there. They took my cover sheet off, put their cover sheet on, sent it to Hasbro. So everything with Transformers was kind of going in between, through Sunbow, and it made it more complicated. It made it more difficult. So we didn't have the same kind of relationship at all. The toys were already created. They existed in Japan. It wasn't like they had to come in and show us new technology. They licensed the technology. And so there wasn't as much reason to have meetings, and we never had any. And one time I was at our animation studio, Marvel Productions, and talking to Lee Gunther, who ran the operations.
This is in Los Angeles.
Yes. And so he said something about Transformers, and I said, well, I did the creative work on that. I said, I wrote that. He said, no, you didn't. Sunbow did. He wouldn't believe that I'd done it. And I said, well, some of the characters are named after my relatives, and you can ask my secretary. She typed it. He thought Sunbow did it, and I was all right, whatever. Yeah, the only way I got credit for that ever was USA Today was doing an article on Transformers when I think it was when the first live action movie was coming out, and I get a call from USA Today. And they wanted to talk to me about the creative work I did on the foundation work I did on Transformers. I said, how do you even know that? My name never appears in any credits anywhere. He said, well, I just got done interviewing Erwin Hassenfeld's son, and he told me all about it. He said he remembers it well. I said, oh, okay. So I told him what I'm telling you guys, and it ran in USA Today, which is nice. That's I get some credit somewhere.
In terms of this might follow up. So much of the visuals for the characters and the products for G.I. Joe and for Transformers were being driven at Hasbro, and Marvel was creating story. And what I mean is Hasbro toy designers are designing toys.
Yes.
Designing action figures.
A lot of them are from Larry's sketches or designs.
Okay. In 1986, there's this big animated Transformers movie that's released theatrically. And partly because the toys are phased out every 2 years, and partly because the movie was an opportunity to tell a big story, Optimus Prime and Megatron, the two leaders, exit stage left. And this is in the monthly Marvel Transformers comic. That story isn't told, but those two characters also exit stage left. And similarly for G.I. Joe, there's this animated movie which doesn't get released theatrically because Transformers tanked. And in the G.I. Joe animated movie, Cobra Commander exits stage left. And Larry Hama has told the story that he was told he had to do the same thing in the comic. He had to get rid of, kill off Cobra Commander. Do you remember, since this feels like, I understand that you're there at the beginning and then afterwards you're pretty hands off. There's an editor.
Didn't need to. Yeah.
So does this ring a bell that this was sort of a larger top-down decision or directive coming in? Does this ring a bell?
The only one who could tell me anything would be the president. And he never opened a comic book and wasn't interested. As long as I was making money, he didn't care. At one time, somebody, Gene Colan, called him, probably to complain about me, because I kept insisting that people do their jobs. So Galton calls me. He says, "Who's Gene Colan?" And I said, "He's an artist." "Is he good?" And I said, "Yeah, he's Hall of Fame, but he's hacking right now." And he said, "Well, tell him to stop calling me." He did the same thing when John Byrne had some complaint about me. He calls me. I was, "Who's John Byrne?" He didn't care at all. All right. So top down on G.I. Joe would have been somebody like Bob Prupus at Hasbro. telling us what to do. I don't ever remember any drama. I mean, there was never any arguments or anything. I mean, this is what you have to do. And, I'm a professional and I would, do what the client wanted. And it's the same with Larry. I mean, he was a good soldier. He would, he might not agree with it. He might think it was dumb, but I mean, and I don't think necessarily he thought that was dumb, but I mean, we could discuss things, but we weren't, it was too good a relationship and we got along so well. There was no big drama.
And what was the commercial relationship like in terms of direction of travel of funds? Was it that you were given the license to do G.I. Joe and use it and do the comics and be left alone, or was there an expectation that there would be some residual going back to Hasbro, or even indeed the other way? Were they paying Marvel to top up the funds?
Well, it was a typical license deal. They did get a piece of our sales, our revenues. But I think it was a favored nations kind of deal, and it wasn't oppressive at all. It was fine because they're selling so well. Yeah, they get some share for owning it. Okay. It's I don't know. I think it went pretty well. Like I said, I kind of stopped going to the meetings, and maybe Larry has some stories about things that happened that I wasn't even aware of. But as far as I knew, it was all fine, and we did not get a whole lot of. I don't know if they ever actually called up and complained about anything, or said, "Well, this has to change," unless it was a situation like you just described, where they wanted it to be consistent. All right, fine. I mean, our production studio, we tried to coordinate with them. They didn't want to be bothered. So, Margaret Lesh she ran the place, and she wanted to have more involvement, more cooperation between us. But Lee Gunther was the operations guy, and he just resisted. He didn't want to. He had enough on his plate, and I don't want to be bothered having to coordinate with anybody. Okay, whatever. So we did our thing. We did it the best we could.
Yeah, I asked that last question because the story of the origin as it's told, Hasbro looked on the comics as not just an end in itself, but also a means of being able to advertise the toys. And with the TV commercials, they advertised the comics so that they could do longer, more interesting adverts with animation.
Yeah, so there was a lot of regulation at that time, probably still is, about advertising to children, and in particular toys. You have to show real kids playing with the real toys. There are a lot of limits on what you can do in terms of animation or dramatization. All right, well, there were no restrictions whatsoever on advertising comic books because nobody did. And so Hasbro, maybe this is Griffin Bacall, could be, they decided that, hey, if we made these advertisements nominally about the comics, and everybody knows it's a toy, and so at the end of they'd have an exciting animation, talk about how wonderful G.I. Joe was, and at the end, for like under a second, they'd flash a picture of the comic book, and so they got away with incredible commercials that made not only kids, everybody said, wow, that's pretty cool, and so it was very clever on their part, and it really wasn't much to do with the comics at all. So
she's been kidnapped by Cobra. We have no alternative. Call in G.I. Joe.
Fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. He never gives up. He'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe.
Who's leader of the Joe team? Buck.
He's America's best. He's in control. He's a man.
Good luck, Joe.
He lives his days. The legend of G.I. Joe.
The Legend of G.I. Joe. New from Marvel Comics.
But I guess you'll take that as the free advertising.
Yeah, I mean, how could it hurt? I mean, I wish they'd actually, had left the comic book image on the screen for more than a quarter of a second. but at least we got some.
There's
some-
also the voiceover tag. What happens next? Find out in Marvel Comics.
Oh yeah, that was great. That was nice.
The legend of G.I. Joe continues at Marvel Comics.
And the one time we actually did a G.I. Joe commercial. I can't remember why. It was kind of at the end of my time, but I believe we actually made one for the comic book. Probably working with Hasbro. I don't know. There was a lot going on at the end of my tenure there, and I wasn't there a lot of the times. So,
if I can, so Mark in his previous question was asking about the initial deal, and your answer was that Hasbro would get some of the a royalty or a percentage.
typical license deal. Yeah.
So Hasbro was paying Marvel. Excuse me. Marvel was paying Hasbro for the license to be able to create a G.I. Joe comic book. There was a flat fee for each issue, or for the year, or for the 3-year term.
No, we just had a contract that said they got a royalty. That's all. I mean,
Okay.
we never paid them any buy-in money. Our
Okay.
buy-in was our creative,
Okay.
and so they get some royalty. And like I said, it wasn't a very aggressive one. I think we had a sweetheart deal with them. The only thing that kind of really went wrong is that for the first year we were going to license it for them, and our licensing people just failed big time. I mean, they were terrible, and so they took that away from us, and they started doing it with their own agency, and they did very well.
And would this be managing the license to be able to sell it on to other people? So
Yeah, to sell it for
all of the
to sell it
merchandise and
for t-shirts, for whatever, apparel, hats, and yeah, and that kind of stuff. So they had all kinds of toys that they didn't make, that they were licensed to thing. I think they had a ride on, something a little kid could ride on, that was
like a tricycle thing, and there were walkie-talkies and
yes, stuff. Some of it that they wouldn't do themselves, but somebody they'd license to somebody and be fine.
Mark, I will forgive you for forgetting that in 2011, early on in the history of my G.I. Joe blog, I posted a scan of a one-page slick about Marvel doing the licensing for G.I. Joe.
What a disaster.
You mentioned, Jim, going to Toy Fair. So that's every year at the end of
It's right around
January,
Valentine's Day.
in February.
Yeah.
Did you go every year for those years that Marvel
Oh,
was making?
Yeah, and
Okay.
every year, even after that, I started going. I think, well, not the first year I was editor-in-chief, because I was only editor-in-chief for about 6 weeks at that point, and I had way too much to do. I couldn't take any time off, and then but the second year I started going to Toy Fair, and I went every year, and got to know a lot of people, not only at Hasbro, but a lot of toy companies, Mattel and others, and I got to meet a guy named Ralph Schaefer. Ralph Schaefer was the co-president of TCFC, those characters from Cleveland, and they did a lot of toy creation and a lot of licensing for companies for whom they created these toys. For instance, along with Bernie Loomis, Toy Genius, their people at TCFC created the Care Bears, and Strawberry Shortcake, and Holly Hobby, and lots of stuff. Mostly girl stuff. I mean, almost all girl stuff. The only boy thing they ever did was Mad Balls. But so I got to know them, and they liked us, and they actually proposed to me that let's do a joint venture, and I said, wow, little tiny Marvel, giant. Well, TCFC was big, but it was part of American Greetings, so it's huge, and that never came to pass. But that was sort of farther down the road toward the end of my time there. But so it never came to pass. But because we had developed such a good relationship, when I just wanted to do kids comics, I call them up and they gave me the Care Bears and some other stuff, Strawberry Shortcake, whatever. Didn't give it to me, but licensed it on very nice terms because they liked us, and they could have taken that stuff anywhere, but they liked us, and as a matter of fact, they like me. Go figure. But when we started talking about this joint venture, that was about the time Marvel was being sold. It was chaotic. I did not like the way that the old owners were kind of selling us down the river. The owners were the board of directors of Cadence, which included a president and a vice president from Marvel. So it was 6 guys took Cadence off the stock market, took it private. And so 6 guys owned all the Cadence companies, including Marvel. They were selling them off, cash in. Well, Marvel was the last, and it was the crown jewel because we were actually worth something. And I just felt they were just really savaging our people. They anything to put money on the bottom line, cash out the pension plan, get rid of our excellent healthcare insurance and replace it with a crummy HMO you had to pay for. They just stopped paying people on some of the programs I'd installed. They just wouldn't pay them. And, so I spent a lot of time fighting that. And then I kind of forced them to fire me, because the new owners were worse than the old ones. And when they finally did sell it, the new owners were worse than the old ones. I was so ignorant in those days. I didn't realize that I could have stopped that because I was a key man and they couldn't sell the company without me. So, but I didn't know that. Paul Levitz would have known. I never went to business school. But anyway, so after the new owners took over, I made them fire me to get my severance pay. And so at that last year, I wasn't around much, and it was some stuff went on there that I wouldn't probably have let happen. But where were we going with that? What was that?
Circling back to Toy Fair.
Oh,
So I can imagine you at Toy Fair in 83, 84, 85, 86 because of G.I. Joe
Right.
and because of Transformers. But it also sounds like you were going there as a representative of Marvel.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And maybe also because it's culturally the thing that's going on in New York that week in February.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I thought it was part of my job to keep track of all that was happening in related industries. I mean, even magazines. I those cheap magazine subscription things you get in the mail. I every month or two I'd pick a category, business magazines, or women's magazines, or farm magazines, or what, and I'd subscribe to a bunch of them. And just with the magazines would come and I'd check them out, see if there's anything interesting, any new things that were going on. I discovered selective binding that way, and some other things like American Baby. If your baby is 1, you get a slightly different magazine than if your baby is 2, because it's selective binding. There's sections they put into this one that they don't put into that one. So I kept trying to think of ways to use this stuff, and some I did. But at any rate, the punchline to that story I was telling you is that when Marvel fired me, somebody, I think it was Joe Calamari, called TCFC. You got Ralph Schaefer on the phone, co-president, and he said, we had to fire Jim. He said, so from now on you'll be working with Tom DeFalco, and Ralph said, no, there's nobody you have that we're interested in working with anymore. Click. So another little Pyrrhic victory for me. It's like somehow I always manage to not get the money. But anyway, I thought that was nice. And I ran into Ralph years later, and he helped me with trying to get a toy deal. And good friends. I was at his house sometimes. Terrific.
I had a question which we've been asking this is a sort of fairly abrupt change again, but I had another question that we've been asking everybody who was involved in the launch to see what memories it might trigger, and it is this image on screen, hopefully. Oh no, not that one. This one. So on the right, you'll definitely recognize that's issue 1 of GI Joe, Herb Trimpe pencils. On the left is like some Hasbro presentation art, which I believe was used internally in Hasbro to as a concept art for the comic. Does this image trigger any memories for you?
No, Larry might know. I don't remember anything about that. I think this is the first time I've ever seen that.
Okay.
I think it's much more likely that the cover came first and that was later. Although they would have had the logo right, wouldn't they? I don't know.
Yeah. I think this was produced as like a sort of a marker concept to kind of help decide what between some various options on that first issue.
Could be. I don't know. Larry would know for sure, but I don't like I said. I don't think I've ever seen that before. If at one of the meetings I wasn't there, they showed it to Larry and said, "Do something like this." Well, maybe they did. I don't know. But and I approved the covers. I would have first they do a sketch. I'd approve it, or change this, move this here, whatever, and then the editor would have the cover executed, and then before it went out, everything that went to the printer, I had to sign off on if I was there, or my designated surrogate would sign off on it. That's usually Mark Gronwald or Tom DeFalco. I would have had Archie do it, but he was so busy, and I couldn't oppress him with anything else. But he would have been, great. But
and this that sort of prompts me to actually to mention something else that we've talked about on our show before, which is kind of that that cover sketch concept for approval. So this was like a policy that you had that you personally had to approve every cover as a sort of sketch concept before it would be
yeah, and I did most of them. I mean, there were some guys, Larry, for instance, I mean, I didn't worry too much about what he was doing. There's a cover sketch for you. It looks like Larry drew that.
So that's a Larry one on the left before it went to Mike Zeck. Yeah,
right. Yeah, I see. Anyway, with the editors I trusted the most, I mean, I didn't worry about Louise. Archie, I didn't. There was nothing I was going to tell Archie he didn't already know. And so, my deal with Goodwin was I said, you do the creative on the creator-owned stuff, okay? And you're not going to hear from me because you know what you're doing. And I'll pave the road. I'll take care of all the crap you don't want to deal with because I'm doing it anyway for the rest of the comics, legal, technical, financial. Archie, he didn't like that dealing with bureaucrats. I mean, if he was talking to a licensing person or a bean counter or a lawyer, his eyes would glaze over. He just, couldn't wait to get out of there. And so I did that because I was doing it for the comics anyway. So I tried to make his life easier. And boy, he did brilliant creative. I never had to worry about what anything Archie did. He, like I said, he knew what he was doing. He was the best ever, I think. The younger guys, the new people, I got involved more, when the new people came in. But usually they learn pretty quick. Carl Potts, he didn't know everything the day he walked in the door, but pretty soon he's teaching people. So,
And Larry's spoken about before about almost like this little industry that he'd have where in his lunch break everyone would be coming into him to ask him for a sketch for their cover, which he'd work up and he thinks there must have been thousands of Marvel covers that were based on one of his sketches. Do you have remember?
Yeah, and some based on mine because some editors were artists like Bob Budiansky. He was also an artist, and Archie was an artist in his. He did little cartoon stuff, but he could draw, and he had a tremendous visual sense. And Larry, of course, and Carl Potts. But there were some like Denny. Denny, to him, the art was some nuisance you had to deal with. And so he wasn't really good with that stuff. So I made sure there were lots of resources. And so, number one, my art director, the art director who works for 26-year-old me, is John Romita Sr., Hall of Fame, all-time great, holy cow. I mean, that guy works for me. Yeah, well, he was doing what he wanted to do. He certainly didn't want to do what I was doing. So, but so anyway, but he was there. This is John Romita. He's there. He's a resource. Go to him. And some people would. Some people would go to these other guys like Larry a lot because he was really good at that, and also Bobby Dancy and other people, and people like Louise. I mean, I don't know if Louise draws at all, really, but she had a great art sense, and she also was married to Walt Simonson. So, over the dinner table, what do you think we should do with this? I don't know, but I mean, so I tried to make it, not too rigid. Try to keep it a little free form, so you could. Before I took over as editor-in-chief, the editor-in-chief, whoever it was, I don't know about Roy, but I think it's true with Roy. Len, Marv, Jerry for 3 weeks, and not Archie because he could do it, but all of them were pretty good creative people, and had some kind of good cover sense, especially Archie. So what each editor-in-chief would do, including Archie, was once a week they'd have a sit down with either John Romita or Gil Kane or Dave Cockrum, usually, occasionally with other guys. But those were the three main ones. And they would design all the covers for the books, for that week's books. The books were going to come out some weeks after, but week by week they did it. And so I don't care who you are, even if you're Goodwin, and you're creating 50 to 60 covers a month, sometimes a certain sameness creeps in. I mean, Len, for instance, it was always like two big figures fighting, and not even your Uru hammer can stop so and so. And the same with Mark. I mean, they all had their things they fall into, and I would have too. But I said, no, I'm going to let every editor design their own covers any way they want. O'Neill, just turn it over to you, or Larry could do it for you, or John Romita, or you do it your way. And they did. And so, and I'd approve it all. I mean, to make sure, it made some kind of sense. But that way we had a tremendous variety. Larry's covers didn't look anything like Louise's. And I mean, they were all, everybody was different. I thought that was a good thing. I mean, the Marvel trade dress said it's Marvel. Doesn't have to look like John Buscema's wrote.
Just as an add-on here, and this is as much for Mark as you, Jim. I saw a John Romita Sr. pencil sketch for an Incredible Hulk cover from 1994. That was online a week ago, and I was struck that Romita was doing cover sketches that late. To me, that feels like sort of later than I thought he still was.
Oh, I didn't know about that, but yes, but that was what, when I was there, that he would do that all the time. It's like, and if he was busy, he'd go see Larry.
And what was the sort of this is more general now, but the sort of the dynamic, the feel of the Marvel office at that period? Who was, you'd had the different offices, but who was there with the doors open? Did everyone,
Well, my door was always open, and people would just walk in. I mean, I think one of my first birthdays, they all got together and they bought me one of those bubblegum machines with the glass.
Uh-huh.
It was made to sit on a desk. I thought, that's really cool, and so I thought, well, what am I going to put in there? I mean, I don't think people want gumballs. So I discovered it worked with jelly beans. You turn the crank and a handful of jelly beans comes out. And so I bought big bags of different jelly beans, and I kept it stocked, and I made it so you didn't have to put money in or anything. There was a switch you could turn, and so I had that on my desk, and so all day I'm working, and people walk in and they're getting jelly beans and leaving, and Goodwin, Archie Goodwin, he sees that. He says, that's a good idea because everybody comes and sees you, So he wanted to do something different. So he had a big jar thing, and he filled it with all kinds of like those small candies and the different kinds, So you want jelly beans, come to me. You want, variety, you go to Archie. And so, we had a steady parade of people, and it was kind of nice actually, keep in touch. But the funny thing was, one time I'm having a meeting with the, I think it was the Germans, international licensees. And so we're talking, and they're sitting on the couch across from my desk. There were a couple of side chairs, and then there was the nice big couch. And so they're sitting on the couch, and we're talking, and in strolls, I think it was Elliot Brown. He just walks right through the meeting, gets his jelly beans, walks out, and they're looking at me like it's a comic book company, We're supposed to be weird. So, but that happened more than once, but that was funny. People just strolling. That was fun. I always kept my door unlocked at night too. If somebody was working late, needed to take a little nap, I had this really nice couch. And no matter, Dave Sims said, "Oh, it got cold there at night." No, it didn't. We controlled our own HVAC, and it was nice and warm all the time. So, but it was a happy place mostly. It got a little cranky toward the end there because we're being sold down the river, and programs keep getting canceled, and pension plans gone, all this stuff. That became a very stressful time, and but. So early on, trying to right the ship and get things on time. And so guys who had lived in anarchy are now being told, no, you have to have that in Thursday, or I'm going to give it to somebody else. And so I'm Mussolini, I'm horrible. But it was life or death. It wasn't like I was just doing this arbitrarily. I say, we do this or we die. And so we did it. We turned it around. All of a sudden, people are making money. They got benefits. They got rights. We're publishing creator owned, the Epic line, and so for a while there, everything it was really a very good and happy place, and everybody. Larry, who is not one to reveal personal things or his emotions or whatever. We were sitting at a convention somewhere waiting for somebody, and we're just hanging around. Started talking about the old days, and Larry said to me, just spontaneously, he said, I could not wait to get to work every day. That's an unusual thing for Larry to say. I said, but I know exactly how you feel. And I think a lot of people felt that way. And every place that size is going to have a few cranky people or bad apples, but we had the minimum.
And what strikes me as well is what a young guy you would have been to have such a significant role. Sort of, I can only imagine, me taking on something like that, thinking, oh no, I'm still too young. I don't have enough experience to deal with this, in my late age. How did that feel?
Well, I was 26 years old, but I'd been working actively in big time comics for 13 years. So it wasn't a pup, And second, Stan recommended me to the president. The president hired me, and I reported to the president. Stan really didn't have anything to do with the comics anymore. He was working entirely on media, entertainment stuff. But he's still Stan, and he has the president's ear and everything. So I'd done some work with him on the newspaper strip, the Spider-Man newspaper strip. He started out with Len Wein writing stories, and then he would write the dialogue, and John Romita would do the art. I kind of didn't like Len's stuff, and so he let him go, not from the company, from the strip. And so then Stan's trying to find a new writer, and everybody's afraid because they don't want to be fired by Stan and be embarrassed. So he asks a lot of people, and finally asks me, and I say, yeah, I'll do it, and so I did a story for him, and I take it to him, and he's reading it like he looks like he has a headache. He's like this, and he's reading it, and gets done. He says, "This is good." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "No, really, it's good." I said, "Yes, Stan, I know what I'm doing." And so actually the exact words is, "Why is it good?" But anyway, so we got along, and the first couple I just wrote, and John had some trouble interpreting what I said. I guess I mean he the problem was that John was drawing it like a romance strip, and Stan wanted romance and adventure. And so John would give you a lot of close-ups of the pretty girl's face when what Stan wanted to see was her dancing, so anyway, I started doing little stick figure layouts for John. And at first he was not happy. He says, "I don't need some kid, doing layouts for me." And I said, "John, it's not to show you, how to draw. I said, I'm just letting you know what's happening. Do it your way, And so, but Stan would he liked my layouts, and after John is such a nice guy. He can't be mad at anybody for more than about 10 seconds. So he got over it pretty quick, and actually he actually liked it because it made it a little easier for him. And if I did something and he chose to change the angle or whatever, he's John Romita. Let him go, leave him alone. But so I worked with Stan anyway, because I was working with Stan on the newspaper strip while I was just the editor. He's got the sense that I maybe knew what I was doing, and he recommended me to the president of the company. And the president of the company, when he hired me, he thought we were on our way out. He thought that I was running a unit that was gonna be gone pretty soon. And then it was like it almost didn't matter who was there. The last thing on earth he expected was that we would turn it around, and it would become. It was the only part of the company that was making money. I mean, the other licensing, not much. And so we were, carrying everybody. So, I mean, and to his surprise. And so I don't think he was like taking any big gamble. He thought the game was lost. Put the backup quarterback in. This game's over.
Jim, I think many Marvel fans and fans of 80s Marvel think of Marvel Comics almost as if it existed in isolation, and it was owned by Cadence, yes. Cadence Industries. Can you, just as a refresher, can you tell us what else Cadence owned or was making or doing?
Well, Cadence Industries started as a company called Perfect Chemical Plate, something like that. They did photographic stuff. And that was back in the late 60s when in the United States, there was almost a fad of creating conglomerates, companies buying up unrelated companies and building what they call a conglomerate. I'll give you Litton Industries, for example. But a lot of the big companies like U.S. Steel or whatever, they're buying up things like fast food chains. What's that got to do with steel? Anyway, so this little company is trying to do that, and then they bought U.S. Pen and Pencil, Perfect Subscription Company, which is the thing where the kids go around the neighborhood and sell subscriptions for to raise money for the church or something. They had vitamin quota stores. They owned a distributor, which was convenient. They owned Curtis Circulation, so that was convenient. Because they did a much better job than Independent News had been doing. They also owned a chain of, I think it was called the Saks Theaters, chain of theaters in Boston, the Boston area. They owned some land out in California, near LA. Why'd they buy land? Maybe it's an investment. They might have had something else. I don't know, but that was a bunch of small, crappy companies, except for Curtis, which was okay. And they what they did is they hired these two guys right out of law school, Paul Hinden and Joe Calamari. And the guy the guy who was the chairman of the board was a guy named Shelley Feinberg, who was famous for coming in and saving these distress situations. So he came in, and before I was there, he came in, and he got these two guys just out of law school, and he started sending them to these companies as hatchet men. They would go in, they would get rid of any dead wood, and get rid of some of the live wood too. I mean, they do anything they could to clean it up and make it look more appealing. And there's plenty of ways, if you know anything about accounting, to sort of inflate your revenues, right? One way was, since Marvel was making money with me, Marvel was paying all the corporate expenses. All these other companies didn't contribute at all. So it looked like their bottom lines were better than they really were. And so because Marvel was hidden as a division as opposed to a subsidiary where you have to report your earnings separately, where they could just pay all the expenses they wanted out of Marvel, and we were making the money for it. So anyway, these guys went around, they clean up these companies, and then they sell them off. And the last one, the crown jewel, was Marvel. Curtis they're not a creative company, so companies like Curtis that provide a service are usually sold for receivables. I mean, you just whatever they're owed at the moment, that's how you buy them. And so Marvel was the crown jewel, and when they came to us, they were going to milk it for all it was worth. But none of those people had ever looked at a comic book. None of the board of directors had no idea, that we turned it around. You think like, hey, it's working now. No, they thought it was like some fad or something. They couldn't tell a bad comic book from a good one. And I'm trying to explain, no, the comics are better now. But they're comics, I mean, they thought all comics were crap. And it's so hard dealing with them. That a bad environment. But for the people in my area, when we were doing really well, they weren't dealing with those jerks. I was. And so for them, things seemed good. And they were good for a while. And then they decided to cash in. So
this is 1986 when Cadence sells Marvel to New World Pictures.
Yeah, the deal actually closed in early January 1987. Somehow they falsified the documents or something, so they get the tax break in 86. But yeah, it was that year was tough. Cadence had many suitors besides New World Pictures, which changed its name later to New World Entertainment. But one of them was Richard Bernstein, who was supermajority owner of Western Publishing. Golden Books, had printing plants all over the country. Very, very prosperous company. He wanted to buy Marvel, and he actually went all the way through the due diligence process. I happen to know this. His I think it was Baker McKenzie was his law firm, and he ended up owing them near $300,000 for doing the legal work, researching, buying Marvel. And of course, he had to send in his auditors and pay them a couple $100,000. So he's into this for $500,000. And he walked away because he said these executives are terrible, and they keep wanting a nickel more. He said, enough, goodbye. So he spent all that money and walked away. So fortunately, with New World, they I don't know, they weren't as bright, but they did close the deal.
I had a question about sort of more the creative side and the period that you oversaw at Marvel, sort of incredible, creative period and sort of a lot of nostalgia from people of just some of those books produced during those during that time. It's a real high point to live up to. We still all of these years go back to a lot of these books.
I had the greatest team ever assembled. You can't win with that team. Fire the coach.
And I was wondering, specifically around the Joe book. So you've got there Larry there as the writer, but you know got these amazing artists. So broadly speaking, it was sort of Trimpe, Bosberg, Wiggum, and then Ron Wagner. What sort of level of involvement did you have in sort of finding all of these the illustrators who right out the back every time they sort of landed at Marvel just seemed to be producing, you know, the gold standard quality of art?
Yeah. Well, Herb was already there when I came in, and as I said, when I took over, well, first, there weren't any editors. I was the only editor, and then when I became editor in chief, I was doing both jobs because I couldn't, you know, I didn't have anything. Well, I quickly got editors, and the first one I think was Bob Hall and Roger Stern, and then I just started building from there. Both Bob and Roger went on to be freelancers, but like I said, I got these great people, mostly because the rest of the industry was dying. The only reason I got Louise is because Warren went out of business, and Archie went all reprint. It's a bad year, 1978. Archie all reprint, Warren out of business, Charlton Comics out of business. Harvey just stopped publishing.
The DC implosion.
DC implosion in June. And one day they canceled 40% of their line. You think there were cartoonists available? You bet. I mean, that's why I got Larry, because DC went under. And he came over, I said, well, you know, what I'm trying to do here, Larry, is, you know, I want to, you know, good stories, well told, you know, care about it, make it mean something. He said, that's what I wanted to do at DC. He said, but they wanted little, you know, yarns that had, you know, twist endings, and that's all they wanted. And they thought comics were read by idiots. I said, not us. I mean, we believe in this stuff. He said, me too. So away we went. The same with Louise. I mean, you didn't have to. Like I said, I was preaching in the choir for the most part. I mean, everybody was already on the same page. They saw what I was trying to do, and they liked it. And so artists showed up. They didn't have much to do with the ones that Larry picked. He could probably tell you those stories. But guys like him, you know, people would come, you know, hoping to work with him. Same with, like I said, Carl Potts. After a little while, he was teaching people. And people were eager to work with him. Chris Warner is a senior big shot editor at Dark Horse. He was Carl Potts helped to train him. So and he was drawing Alien Legion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know,
all right. I thought you were about to say Aliens versus Predator. I think he did as well over at Dark Horse.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so good people started coming out of the woodwork. Also, it didn't hurt that I like I said, I raised the rates. I started putting in benefits. I started playing fair. It used to be that somebody would routinely be asked to, oh, can you draw me a little drawing for the corner box on the cover? And they were just expected to do that. You know, I said, nobody works for free. Nobody works for free. We pay for everything. You work, we pay.
So Jim, how much does an artist get paid if they draw the corner box spot
in
illustration?
my day?
Yeah.
In my day, probably $100 or something.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. I remember that also the logos, those logos, trademark logos. You know how much Marvel was paying for trademark logos when I came in? $22. $22. First one I bought, I paid $1,500 for. And that was pathetic, but it was the best I could do. You know, it's just why we had to make it fair. I mean,
this is actually that's a good segue, if I can. We've been talking about story and character and art, but there is this element of Marvel design. So logos, layout, which is people in the bullpen, right? Like people who were doing corrections and paste up and letterers. Can you talk about design and how a Marvel book, I don't mean like cover art, I mean how a book looks to the audience and to your aesthetics?
Well, I never told anybody write like me or design like me or any of it. But we tried to hire good designers and tried to give them a sense of what our purpose was here, and the same with the artists. I said, tell a story well, make it clear at a glance. Anyone in the world should be able to look at any panel and know exactly what's going on there. And I discourage the overlapping, interlocking, slanty panel. Don't know which balloon to read next. Didn't outlaw it. To me, it was like, you better be pretty darn good if you're going to start playing with the panel borders. That's what Archie used to call it, playing with the panel borders. And and so most guys got the drift. Oh, we're going to do straightforward storytelling. I didn't say, it has to look like this, or I like this style, or draw like Joe Buscema. Stan used to do it. He used to say, draw like Herbie. And so Herb Trimpe, and some other guys tried to do it too. And I would never do that. And I think that was a mistake on Stan's part. But so what I found was that if you just get them to understand the mission, which were good story, well told, make it clear at a glance. Each guy will do it in his own way. And then sometimes people who had earned their spurs, Bill Sienkiewicz and Claremont wanted him to do the New Mutants, and they came to me, and Bill said, "But I want to do it all experimental," because he had been great. He started out drawing like Neil Adams on the Moon Knight stuff. He developed his own styles, all straightforward, very clear, very nice, but now he wanted to do some kind of crazier stuff. He wanted to try things. I thought, all right, Bill's a genius. All right, we're Marvel Comics. If we can't experiment, who can? Nobody. So go ahead, Bill, swing for the fences. You'll never hear from me about, oh, you could have told this clearer. I said, just rock the world. Go ahead. And so he did. He did some pretty weird stuff on New Mutants. But, and the newsstand sales actually went down because get a lot of young readers on the newsstand, and they just couldn't figure it out. It's just hard to read. Us guys, we have the patience to sit there and figure it out because it's beautiful and we want to know. And so with the direct market, sales skyrocket. And I thought, it's a good experiment. I wouldn't want everybody drawing this way. It's very sort of Esteban Maroto, But when a guy earned the right to do it, we encourage experimentation. Larry earned the right to do a silent issue long before he met me, and he did a brilliant job. And I was. It's really funny. It's like there was no house style. I never told anybody anything but philosophy, and yet people embraced it, and they found all different ways to do what I was asking them to do. And so, Louise's books didn't look like, Larry's, and Larry's didn't look like Budiansky's, but they all look good. And there was always story and storytelling was given, primary importance.
We sometimes talk about the clarity of the storytelling in G.I. Joe from Larry, and that any issue could be someone's first. And
I say that all the time.
And just the subtle ways of introducing the characters so that you know exactly who they are.
Stan always did it gracefully, and people would complain, "Oh, you want us to tell all about each character every issue?" And I said, I didn't tell you to do it badly. I said you can do it gracefully. With Stan, it was just seamlessly in there, and by page 4, you know who everybody is, but you don't ever feel like you had something explained to you. It's just you see it in the action, and so some guys struggle with it, but most guys figured out what I was talking about. And I never liked those dumb little things. When the comics were kind of chaotic, Stan, I guess, told Roy, put a little thing at the top of every splash page that explains who the character is, because nobody's doing it in the book. And so they had those dumb banners at the top, at least Roy's were well written, or he swiped them from Howard or something. But I thought those were ridiculous, and a good, if you can't tell what's going on, get a better writer or teach this one. But you should be able. It should be effortless. Anybody, the first issue that they don't need to know everything about Spider-Man. If the story takes place at the Daily Bugle or something, don't mention Aunt May. Okay, if it takes place at Peter Parker's house, yeah, you have to mention Aunt May. Don't mention Jameson. Don't bother. You don't need it. Tell them what they need to know for this story. And a lot of times you can lay it between the lines and people can figure it out. And so pictures, if the artist is doing his job, sometimes they can figure a lot of it out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
I had a couple of more specific G.I. Joe questions, and
Sure.
then I think I'm done with the G.I. Joe stuff. But do you remember the circumstances around the creation of the additional G.I. Joe book, Special Missions, as like the secondary G.I. Joe book that ran for Tim? How many issues?
Yeah, but it was
26.
doing so well.
28 issues.
It was doing so well. G.I. Joe was doing so well. We tried to figure out, what else we could do. And Larry came up with all that stuff. No command from upstairs, nothing like that. I used to get every once in a while, someone would talk to Galton and explain to him the X-Men was a good selling book, best selling book. And so I'd get never from him, but from the people that were talking to him. I get calls from circulation or finance, and they'd say, well, why don't we do like more X-Men books? I'd say, because that's not what you do. You don't dilute a franchise that's working, and we don't have other Claremonts and John Burns lying around, waiting for an X-Men book. I said, what we do is we try to make the Avengers better, try to make Spider-Man better, try to make all the books like the X-Men, not like the X-Men, but as successful. And I always won that fight, except when Claremont comes and he says, I want to do the New Mutants, like a young kid's X-Men. So I'm getting pressure from both sides here. And I finally said, all right, if you can handle it, sure. And then the next thing you know, where somebody proposes X Factor, and the same deal. I'm getting pressure from upstairs and pressure from downstairs. And I said, all right, X Factor, here we go. It made sense. It was some of the X characters who were like not being actively used at that time. And the same thing with Larry. I mean, he'd come up with ideas, and the book was doing so well. Same thing with the Marvel Universe Handbook. We did the Marvel Universe Handbook. It was such a success. You always know it's a success because a year later DC does it. They did Who's Who. But anyway, it was such a success that the first thing was planned to be 12 issues. And we ended up having to do a 13th issue, the Book of the Dead, And then we did a deluxe edition. It was more expanded. And then we had to do updates every year. And it was its own little industry there. And Gruenwald loved it. He just loved doing that. And so, if a Gruenwald or a Larry or something like that wanted to, do related items, all right, I consider that. Yeah,
no, it's makes a lot of sense if it's top of the subscription chart or whatever, then if Larry wants to do one more, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
And the point about the X-Men is sort of really resonating as well, because for me as an X-Men reader, sort of the clarity of that single story that Chris Claremont was telling at that time was really compelling, and that just the later X-Men with the deluge of books that followed beyond just the ones you're talking about.
Yeah, there were 14
made
14 X-Men related books.
But as a contrast, can I jump in? Jim, by the time you came in, there was a second Spider-Man book.
Yeah, there was, and there was Marvel Tales, which was reprints of the early ones. Yeah, that was Roy, and I don't know. I guess Spider-Man was selling better than anything else. In the early 70s, the books weren't doing too bad. It was in that little mid 70s range there. It was 74, 75, 76, and even 77 until we turned it around. That was when things were bad. But I guess back when he did that, Spider-Man was selling well, and he thought, well, why don't we do this other one? Spectacular Spider-Man was the two that were under Roy, I think, was Spider-Man and Team Up. Spectacular Spider-Man was created as make work for Jerry Conway. Jerry was Marv was fired and as editor-in-chief, and Roy was going to come back. And at the last minute, he changed his mind, decided he was going to move to California, try to get into the film biz. And so Stan remembered, he didn't run the comics. It wasn't his call, but he remembered that he had once, when he was running the comics, promised that if Roy ever left, Jerry could be the editor-in-chief. And he didn't get that because, like I say, it wasn't Stan's call anymore. But instead, Marvin Len convinced somebody, Stan, to recommend one of them to the president. And Len lasted a while, 8 months, I think. Marv lasted a year. And so, like I said, they were going to bring Roy back. He changed his mind at the last minute. So Stan remembered, we owe one to Jerry Conway. And so he talked to Galton, and they hired him. And he came in like a day later, and because he was working at DC at the time. So, but he only lasted about three weeks, I think, maybe a little more, but that's about it. And so he decided he couldn't stand it. It was chaos, and it was hard to deal with. And so he was pretty smart though, and he knew, as I knew, got to get these books on time. Got to, he had a different way of going about it than I did. But anyway, so Jerry leaves quickly. And I guess Archie was the editor of the Black and Whites. I guess they figured to just promote him. And they did. But when Jerry left, he left as a contract writer-editor. And he had made a contract for 8 books a month. I don't know anybody who could write 8 books a month except Stan, who did 10 or more a month for 10 years running. But so Jerry had all this work to do, and it was more than he could handle. And but there weren't actually enough books to give him that, and so they actually Archie had to kick guys off of books to give to Jerry, and created Spectacular Spider-Man to give to Jerry. So anyway, a lot of the writers were disgruntled because Claremont lost something, Mantlo lost something, Mensch lost something, and Jerry's so clever. He got wind that they were forming sort of a citizens' vigilance committee to do something. So he goes in and he somehow convinces them, oh, yeah, that's right. I want to join the Citizens Vigilance Committee. And he actually went into Stan's office with them. Like I said, Stan didn't have any authority, but he's still Stan, So now, like, Jerry weasels his way into the guys who were complaining about essentially him. And so Stan said he'd see what we could do. And so Archie proposed, why don't we do, like Classics Illustrated, make work. And so Galton approved that. And so there were those awful Marvel Classics that were make work. I think Mensch did one. I think Claremont did one. They were awful. And not because of those guys. It's just because nobody wanted them. And so anyway, that was why Spectacular Spider-Man was created. And I don't know what else, but then there were a couple of the books that were created around that time that were, Protect the Trademark books, Spider-Woman, She-Hulk, things like that. They didn't want somebody else to come out with a female Hulk or a female Spider-Man. So, but that's how things were done there. When I came in, we didn't have so much of that. We didn't have to.
And this is my sort of final GI Joe sort of related question
Sure.
I wanted to
I
ask.
strayed away from GI Joe. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. This is all gold. So I'm happy to hear it. But sort of just anecdotally, it feels like for a lot of comic readers, GI Joe was quite a gateway drug, I guess, because of the appeal of the toy, all of that advertising. GI Joe was the comic that got a lot of people reading comics, collecting comics, going into comic shops. Tim there, me. What's your sense of that sort of factor around the comic, and you're sort of seeing it all these years later? And sort of the second part of that conversation is do you see like a disproportionate amount of people coming up to you at conventions with a GI Joe book or a GI Joe question?
Well, I'll tell you what, if Larry's there, everybody comes up with a GI Joe book or something they've already had signed by Larry. And that works for just about anything. If Bob Hall's there, I see a lot of Avengers. And if Zachary Beatty are there, everybody has a Secret Wars. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I learned a lot of my basic training was with Mort Weisinger, and Mort spent a lot of time teaching me stuff that didn't directly relate. It seemed like I was a writer. I did layouts. I designed covers for him. But I mean, I'd go to New York and visit the office. I lived in Pittsburgh, and he each time I was there, he'd sit me down with somebody, maybe more than maybe several times, to learn more about in-house production. Jack Adler's teaching me in-house production. I'm thinking, why do I need to know in-house production? But you don't say no to Mort, And so, and Jack Adler taught me a lot about printing production, and Tatiana Wood taught me about coloring, and I think it was George Klein that explained a lot of stuff about inking to me, and then meanwhile, Mort is teaching me about the business of the business, about the marketing and licensing and the merchandising and international and also the finance, explaining about the unit costs and how they vary with the print order and just everything to do with the business of the business. To the point that when I was a senior in high school, everybody had to take a class called economics. Mr. Blackburn, never forget him. Anyway, so we come in on the first day. My group, my fellow seniors, come in on the first day, and he says, "Today you're going to take my final exam." And everybody said, "What? On the first day we're taking a test?" And we all took his final exam on the first day. And he's just trying to find out what we didn't know, right? I got it 100%. I got it all, thanks to Mort, And so the next day he calls me up to his desk. He said, "Well, you passed my final exam. You don't have to come to this class. Here's a permanent." He gave me a permanent hall pass, so I go to study hall and do other people's homework. And so he was effective that way. And so all that stuff came in real. It didn't work out. Then I ended up at DC because his assistant, I asked his assistant, "What's going on here?" He said, "He's training you to have a job like his." I'm like, "Why?" And he's always yelling at me. But that all came in real handy at Marvel, to be able to discuss things with him. Now, when Mort taught me about marketing and stuff, he made it clear to me about how you need to get people's attention. That's why he was so interested in the covers, and also in events that people might catch your eye. All right, so and then I saw how well Star Wars did, and I thought, yeah, you're right, gateway drug, because when we had the chance to do G.I. Joe, I'm thinking every kid and almost everybody in this country is going to know who G.I. Joe is. And there are people walking past comic book racks every day and they don't know who Daredevil is and they don't care, Ghost Rider, what, who cares? But if they see G.I. Joe, their eyes go wide. Okay. And they buy issue 13 and they like it. Well, then maybe they come back to that rack. Maybe they try Spider-Man, or maybe they try Superman. I didn't care, just trying to build markets, save this dying industry. And so it had worked so well. So many people tell me. I started with G.I. Joe or Secret Wars or Star Wars. And so I thought, well, that's what we do. We need something that's an eyeball catcher. And then if they like it, well, first of all, if the guy buys issue number 13 of G.I. Joe and he likes it, he'll find a comic shop. Oh, trust me. I would have when I was a kid. I'd want those first 12. I like this. Where can I get back issues? Look it up in Yellow Pages. But the thing is, it really worked well with any of the big. It had to be a super movie. It had to be a super toy, but that really worked well. Or a super event like Secret Wars has sold millions. It was not just dumb luck. It was. I was aware of it. It was sort of. Wasn't like I planned and set out to do it and went and got G.I. Joe, but when it started to happen, I said, this is great. This is gonna be wonderful. People are gonna love this stuff. And and we had Larry, and he put together the A-Team, and lo and behold, it turned out to be a huge success. So, all right, that was my theory.
Jim, we've done some episodes where people show art, original art they own, or convention sketches that they've had commissioned. I see over your shoulder a Jack Kirby drawing of Captain America and the Red Skull. Could you tell us about 2 or 3 pieces of original art in your collection that are particularly meaningful to you?
Well, I don't have much in my collection. I when I came in at Marvel as editor, Roy Thomas had set up the artwork return system. He got that going about the same time that DC did. But Roy was a writer, and he thought that the writer should get pages. So some went to the pencilers, some went to the inker, and 2 pages each issue went to the writer. I always felt that doesn't sound right. So when I got my 2 pages for writing a story, I get 1 to the penciler and 1 to the inker. And they were pleased. And I changed that when I came in. I changed that system so that the 2 people who did the art, the penciler and the inker, got all the pages. Some of the writers were a little peeved, but I remember telling I don't know, Claremont maybe, or maybe it was Bill Mantlo. I don't know. Anyway, I remember having a conversation where I said, "You're now making well more than double per page than you used to, and you have benefits." I said, this is a wrong thing here. The artist should have the art. And so you're way better off. And because they were saying, well, you're hurting my income. I sell those pages. Now you're making more money than ever, and let's have justice served here. So they grumbled about it for a little while and they got over it, but all the artists were very happy. And so I don't have much in the way of original art. That piece was given to me by Jack Kirby. Actually, he did it at San Diego. I bought it and gave it back to him for reasons too long to explain. And he gave it back to me, and it's inscribed at the bottom. You can see probably his signature in ink. Under that, like a ballpoint pen, it says, "To Jim, a good friend." So that is a very important thing to me. That's a prized possession. I have a painting by Bill Sienkiewicz that it was a birthday present. He gave it to me. It's me from here down.
From there down.
Yeah. And I said, Bill, because he said, well, for your birthday, I'm going to do your portrait. I said, oh, great. And I said, Bill, he said, that's what I see when I look at you. It's beautiful, though. And I have it hanging in my dining room. And I'll tell you what, I don't even have to tell people this story. They walk in and they start laughing.
Just in case people are listening to this podcast and not watching the video version, Jim has his hand at his neck. Jim Shooter is tall, and so this is a portrait of Jim Shooter from the neck down. Jim, is this what are the colors? Is this in Sienkiewicz's more painterly style? What does it look like? Is it big?
It's in his painterly style. It's sort of me with my hand in my pocket. I'm wearing a sport coat, and I have a tie on. I used to wear a tie at Marvel because I would often be called into meetings, occasionally with the board, or occasionally with executives or executives from other countries, or toy partners or something. And so I wanted to look, respectable. And so he painted that, and he painted it well. It's beautiful. And like I said, it hangs in my dining room, and people walk in, they get the joke right away. And so that's all. They always used to do giant Jim jokes. They get more giant Jim jokes around there than you can believe. Like on Marvel Age, always giant Jim. But yeah, and then I have a couple other pages. Don Perlin gave me a couple pages, and that's nice. David Lapham gave me a beautiful page from the Unity issue, one of the Unity issues of Shadow Man. I wrote the Unity issues, and a few others, just a few.
Is there anything outside of comics in fine art illustration or children's book illustration, newspaper strips?
Yeah, I have a Nancy strip that was given to me by Guy Gilchrist, and that's framed, and that's beautiful. He did that for years. I also have a painting. It's not really a painting. I think it's done in pastels, but it's full color, and it's of a ballerina sitting on like after the workout, kind of sitting, on a counter or something. It's by Joe Rubinstein, and it's gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. Joe gave me that. And he said, I want you to have this. I said, wow, you sure? I mean, holy cow. And so that I have that in the living room. And that's just great. Joe, people don't know this about Joe. Joe's a very good painter, a very good portrait artist. He actually he studied portrait art, and he had there was a contest, I think a nationwide contest for portraits, and he finished in the top 10. He wasn't first, second, or third, but he was in the top 10. Got an honorable mention. Did a beautiful job. I mean, the guy's very talented and amazingly good at the likenesses and portraits.
This is the artist that I guess listeners will best know as the inker of the likes of Wolverine.
The Wolverine miniseries he inked, and he inked a lot of stuff. I mean, so much stuff. He was a go-to guy for a long time.
We've been talking quite a long time and taking up a lot of your time, so I don't want to monopolize your time too much. But yeah, so Tim, was there any sort of final sort of questions from you?
No, this has been wonderful. I'm out of questions.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, if you ever, if you guys just want to talk to me, or if you ever want to do this again, anytime. It was fun.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean,
I may email a follow-up question for my book and not for my podcast with Mark, who does all the work on our podcast. Yes, Mark, I'm out of questions.
Yeah.
Anytime. Do you guys have my contact information?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So you can get in touch with me anytime. I'm happy to help.
Yeah. My only other questions would be just more self-indulgent sort of curiosity questions about, for example, with Marvel being the cultural phenomenon that it is now, particularly with the cinematic universe and all of the shows on Disney Plus and stuff, as a sort of an outsider, all of these, years later, how looking at kind of what it's become, what do you make of it all?
Well, I'll tell you what. Like I said, when Galton hired me, he said, the comics are going to die. It's over. And I said, you're so wrong. And the part of the reason I said that is because I always thought, that there could be good movies about comic book characters and so forth. And Star Wars proved me right. I thought, boy, if they can do that with space opera, and they turned their attention to comics, wow, holy cow! So I said I would know this is going to happen, and he didn't think so. And so anyway, that year, my first year as editor-in-chief, that's when the Superman movie came out, the first one with Christopher Reeve.
Right.
And it got good reviews. You remember, I don't know if you remember the motto, "You'll believe a man can fly," right? Got good reviews, playing to packed houses, big hit. Okay. And so I said, this is it. This is the watershed. Here we go. And so I told everybody, I said, no, you guys straggle in sometimes. I said, but tomorrow be here at 9. I said, we're going to the movies. And I took everybody, 30 some people, and walked across town. And the only show you get into is the early morning show. That's why they had to be there to get them to the movies at the 10 o'clock show, or you couldn't get in. And so I got them there, bought everybody's tickets, bought them all popcorn. And I said, we have to watch this. This is a watershed. This is a big thing in the history of our industry. And we should see it. And remember this moment, right? So, but we did, and we watched it. It was pretty good. I mean, I could quibble with things here and there, but I thought, no, it's not some silly thing. It's a real movie. And so we're trooping back across town, or we come into the office, and Stan's office was still at 575 Madison then, even though he wasn't involved with the comics. He was anyway. So he sees us all trooping down the hall, and he comes out and he's looking at me. He's to me, where were you? And I said, I took everybody to see Superman. And he said, and you didn't ask me? It was like a kid. He was like so, upset. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, Stan, I didn't think of it. I said, but he said, I should have done it. I said, next time let's do it together, So anyway, but I knew that was a significant moment, and I knew that the technology would keep evolving, and that this was going to happen, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe was destined to happen, and it has. And the Marvel movies, at least, are really, almost all of them are really pretty good. Only those crappy Fantastic Four ones, I think they're produced by Fox. I don't know, but they were substandard. But my favorite is Guardians of the Galaxy. I loved that. That was great.
I guess I do have a question
Sure.
now that I've put myself on the spot to come up with one more question. Jim, so much of your work has been collected in paperback, graphic novel form, Marvel, DC, Valiant. Do you have a shelf or shelves in your home of your work?
I have a bunch of bookcases full of this stuff. And I'm probably, dumb for doing this. I dig them out and refer to them once in a while, and probably have destroyed any value they might have. But, I don't care. I'm just trying to, I do keep as much as I can. Over the years, I've given so much away. People come, they have a kid, here's a comic book, that I don't have a complete collection by a long shot, but I've got a lot of stuff, and it's, I carry it around with me to conventions. I have these big presentation books, my show and tell, and there's some comics and also old letters and memos and photos and stuff. People leaf through it, and then they say, well, what's this? And I tell them the story. Oh, this will crack you up, Mark. You were rattling off names of people at Marvel UK before, I believe.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I was at a convention in London, I think 2 years ago, or maybe it was 2019. I don't know. Anyway, I was at a convention in London, huge convention, gigantic convention hall. And I had a couple tables. I'm sitting across the aisle from this guy. He's looking at me. And so he comes over and he says, you're Jim Shooter. And I said, yeah. And he says, I used to work at Marvel UK, and you used to come over and do all these training sessions with us. I said, yeah. I said, I said, you look a little different now. I'm not sure who you are. And he told me, and right now I cannot think of his name, but he told me, and he's a successful writer and artist. And he said, he said, one time we had a group picture taken. I said, yeah, here it is. And showed him in the show and tell book. He said, that's me. That's me. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, that's what my show and tell is. It's 58 years in the comic book business, all kinds of stuff, crazy stuff.
Wonderful. I'm just trying to think who it might have been. Maybe it been Dan Abnett or
I don't know. Like I say, he's right. I'm struggling with the name right now. I mean, I know. If the picture was handy, I'd show it to you.
okay.
But
Yeah. So normally, as we sort of wrap up, we ask our guests if there's anything, where people can find them online and what they have that they'd like to promote. So this is your opportunity to now, if there's something you want to promote or let people know what you're sort of working on right at the moment, then.
Well, I don't really have anything to promote. I'm doing some Hollywood work now, comic book related stuff, script doctor concept stuff, and that's nice. Pays well. It's fun, and I'm going to do a book. There's a friend of mine who's independent publisher, like his stuff and I like his attitude, and so he has a book called Guardians, which I'm going to help him relaunch. I'm going to write a story for him, and I do occasional little indie things. Just they call me up. They say, "Would you write us a story?" I said, "Yeah." Well, what's your rate? I said, "Well, what can you afford?" They'll say, "We can go as high as $12 a page." And I'll say, "Why don't you give that to the artist, and I'll just do it for fun?" And so I've done a bunch like that, and nothing really current out there to and I don't have any web page or anything like that. I work for with a company called Illustrated Media. I'm not an employee, but they use me for concept stuff and Hollywood stuff and things like that. And Illustrated Media has a website, illustratedmedia.com. And I have had a blog, which I stopped doing years ago, maybe almost 10 years ago, I guess. There's a lot of interesting stuff. It's still around, and you can still go through it. A lot of interesting stuff there. It's fun stuff. And some of this, like these stories I'm telling, I write an article, and then there's all these comments I get. Sometimes I would get tons of comments if the subject was real interesting. So that's it. It's called jimshooter.com. And it's a blog, and even though I haven't worked on it for a long time, there's some pretty cool stuff that I'm about to start doing it again. When I did it a couple times a week. Now it'll probably be once a week, but I'm going to try to get back into that. Is that all this fun stuff? Huh?
Jim, if that blog doesn't feel active to you right now, I'm pretty certain both Mark and I were there this morning.
Well, it still gets a lot of page views. I mean, a friend of mine who knows about that stuff tells me a lot of page views. I think at its peak, it was getting over 300,000 page views a month, and because it's fun stuff. It's not all about me. It's all about what happened and all the cool things that went on.
So, okay, so Jim, there's this wonderful book of interviews with you that's edited by Jason Sachs and Eric Hoffman and Dominic Grace, and there are many interviews with you online, both text and video. Do you think about writing an autobiography?
Well, funny you should say that. There's I'm sort of working on one now. I have offers from several publishers to do it. I just haven't had time. And recently I've had some interest about, maybe making it into a movie or something. But I don't know. I'm not in a hurry to do it. I hope I'm around long enough to do it. But I've got so much good stuff that I'm having fun with now. I just don't have time to, to do that. We'll see.
Yeah, and just my mind's racing about you, sort of like the adaptation of your life, like sort of mad, like not quite the right era, but Mad Men, sort
I
of
guess. Yeah.
the story, the story of what it was like at that time with all of this stuff going on around you. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it was tough times. When I started off, like I said, everything was late. We were missing shipping on books. That's how I was able to save money. I got us on time. It took me 4 months till we were shipping the correct number of books. My first month left. I'm sorry, Archie left me a mess, and we were supposed to publish 45 color comics in January of '78. Only 26 made it out the door. You schedule time at the separator. You schedule time at the printer. If that book doesn't show up, you pay anyway. And so by getting us on time, I saved many hundreds of thousands of dollars. Also, if it was somewhat late, then you had to have the plates, which were made in Connecticut, shipped to Sparta, Illinois, express. You ship a book's worth of zinc plates that far in a hurry in those days, wow, cost a fortune. And so anyway, saved money doing that stuff, and then was able to end that part of the chaos. But there was still lots of chaos left, and we sorted through it, got it done. For a while, things were good.
Just the concept of zinc plates as a technology just sounds fascinating. It sounds expensive.
I'm gonna
Zinc
step.
plates-
I'm gonna
zinc
step away
plates-
from the.
Yeah,
I'm gonna step away from the camera and grab a plate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zinc plates made from hand separated film, hand separated.
Mm.
Okay. And so you'd send them a color guide, and then these ladies would interpret the color guide. They'd make 9 different cells plus the black cell, and 25% yellow, 50% yellow, 100% yellow, 25% magenta, 50% each color. And they would look at your color guide and they'd guess. They'd say that brown is probably a 50% blue and a 25% yellow and so much red. And so they'd fill in that area on the appropriate cells with red paint. And that's what they use. They'd make the film. And then they combine the film for the 3 degrees of red and the 3 degrees of yellow and the 3 degrees of blue, cyan, into one piece of film from which they would make a zinc plate. And I was talking about ancient technology.
It boggles the mind. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, and it was printed letterpress. That's like potato block printing, except it's on a drum.
Mark, you want to go full screen on me?
Full screen.
So here is the plate for the cover to the second printing of G.I. Joe issue 2. This is the black plate, not the cyan or yellow or magenta plate. So what we're seeing here is the negative of 4 Joes in the Arctic, and then also the back cover with the a PSA with Power Pack and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So you can go back to so this is 80, 83, 84, 85. So this is metal and this stuff is plastic because this is flexographic. Do I have that right?
Yeah, it was all metal plates when I started in the 60s, and it was all metal plates up until around the time I became editor-in-chief. And then they wanted to save money, so we tried flexograph. That was ugly. And then they came up with the plastic plates, which if the lines were too thin, they would, as the press got hot, they'd get wiggly. We used to call them boogie lines. And finally, they sorted that out and made it better. I don't know. And these days, everything is photo offset, so no more problems like that. But back then, the paper was bad, the printing was bad. It was hand separated, and so we started trying to change that while I was there. We started publishing on Baxter paper or other good stock. We even upgraded the newsprint. I think we went from basic newsprint to Mando Roto, I think. And anyway, and yeah, so you were holding up cover plates there. Covers were printed on a smaller press. The comics were printed 16 up on a big press, and it was real interesting to watch. I was at World Color Press a number of times, and it was just I don't know, just amazing it came out as well as it did.
Are you describing the interior pages printed larger because they are then cut down? And
No, the interior, there's more of them on each drum. There's
Okay.
more of them on each drum, 16.
Okay.
So, you know, you have each color and the black. And like I say, it's potato block printing, but it's surprisingly came out pretty well sometimes.
Yeah, it's astonishing that we got what we got from the process. We've
Yeah.
talked before about you know, the limitations of the process and what that meant for actually, you know, the inputs from the artists, because they can only do so much that then gets reproduced on the page without it being
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah, I'm very much. I mean, maybe your one's favorite aesthetic is the one that they're exposed to when they're 5 or 8 or 12. But you know, I think there is some amazing color in modern computer colored comics. Colored with computer.
Offset printed. So ours were 65 lines an inch. You could actually kind of see the dots if you look closely, the printing dots.
I for color printing, you know, when a nighttime scene is just like 50% blue and 75% blue for the guys and the backgrounds,
Yeah.
maybe to an artist or the colorist, that's a compromise and a disappointment. That's what I grew up with. So I sort of that's what I want when I look at comics. And
Well, yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, that's what I grew up with. And one thing I'll say though, back when I was a kid, I mean, maybe some of the comics were not as, you know, flashy and sophisticated as they got later, but they were all done by professionals. There was always a story. It always made sense. It was always told well. You know, I mean, you could read a Uncle Scrooge comic book easily, even if you were very young. You know, whether you like the Superman story or not, it was very clearly told and it was solidly constructed. You know, and the coloring in those days, people learned how to color. You really only had about 56 colors to work with, because anything that was too heavy of ink saturation would bleed through the paper. That's how bad the paper was. So your potential 64 colors, you really could only use about 56. And in those days, and it lingers to this day, by the way, in those days, there were just kind of not rules, but guidelines. Heroes are red, blue, and yellow, with very few exceptions. Green Lantern. Villains are orange, green, and purple. And check it out, there's still a lot of that around. And those are dark and solid colors. Civilians were things like magenta, brown, Prussian blue, you know, all the off colors. So what happens is the characters are usually in the foreground. They're nice and dark and solid, and they make the backgrounds pastel, instant depth. Okay. Well, that was simple. That art got lost. I kept preaching to people, make it clear. You don't have to be formula like they used to be, because there is a way to do a lady in a pink dress or a guy in a tan suit or something. You know, sure, of course you can do it, but you have to be good to know how to make that character stand out, especially if you're standing next to the superhero who's bright red, blue, and yellow. You have to think about what that background is going to be. Too many people just sit down and start coloring. No, you have to analyze the panel first. Figure out, how am I going to make depth here? How am I going to make it clear? How am I going to make it dramatic? And, you know, the best ones do that, like Paul Audio, Pat Olaf, J.J. Jackson, Max Shield, whose real name is Christie. You know, they figured it out. Glynis Oliver. Anyway.
Okay. So yeah, as we're sort of rolling into talking together for almost 3 hours, let's finish there, because we've got to finish somewhere. You're welcome to join us for the sign out. So, Tim,
Oh,
where can people? Go on.
at the very end of this, Jim, at the very end of this, I'm going to sing a jingle, which is our version of the 1988 G.I. Joe television toy commercial jingle.
Can't wait.
That's what that'll be. Mark, people can find me video essays from my creative partners at Atomic Abe Productions. That's our YouTube channel, our website, atomicabe.com. My brick and mortar shop is in Somerville, Massachusetts, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at a realamericanbook.com.
And if you are new to Talking Joe, you can visit talkingjoe.co.uk. That is the website with all of the details and links to our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all of that. A big thanks as well to all of our Patreon subscribers who are supporting the show. And after a long and very interesting discussion, I'll say I think that is us done. But remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Oh, Metropolitan Opera.
There we go. If you want to sing too, there's the lyrics. So
You still
join
want
us
to have
next time.
viewers.
Laters.
Thanks a lot, guys. You guys are great. It's very nice.
Thank. Both Tim and I, really passionate, not just about G.I. Joe, but all things comics, really. And
Me too.
Since we didn't talk about Valiant, I will say I got hooked pretty strongly into Valiant right before Unity with the launch of Archer and Armstrong. And then I convinced my parents to help me pay for all of Unity.
Yeah.
So
that was about $50 worth. Yeah. But you got Frank Miller covers and Walt Simonson covers, and it was a nice crossover story.
I laid them out all on the floor so I could see the entire image together.
Cool. You made my day.